So hello and welcome to one of my interview circle interviews. I'm here with the wonderful Hanifa Mohammed.
Hi.
And before we started, we were just talking and trying to remember how long we've known each other, and we just couldn't remember. So we've come to the conclusion that it's definitely over 5 years. But I remember we belonged to some women networking groups in Luton, and I do remember seeing Hanifa around, but we never actually spoke to each other. And I remember the time we did speak to each other was after I'd spoken at an event. And
Yes.
do you remember what you said?
Oh, very much. Well, I may not remember word for word, but what I do clearly remember the experience was that you were telling my story. And I was really blown away by what you said, the group of women that you were with. But I think as a woman of colour, I connected with you immediately.
Yeah.
And the fact that you were telling the story that I had for so long denied telling even myself, let alone telling anyone else, was just so, it just took my breath away. I was in a bit of a state of emotional confusion for a while, but also there was that sense of, you've helped to get me on the road. I knew that that would be a turning point for me. So I'm eternally thankful for that whole experience and for you and for being so embracing of me and listening to my story.
Yeah.
The number of times you've had to listen to it as well.
So as you can see, this is a bit of a different interview where we're in the same room.
Yeah.
So Hanifa is local. She lives about 5 minutes away from me, which is great. So I got her down here so we can have the interview together. Normally we'll do it via Zoom and I'll have somebody else in another location, but it's such a great opportunity to be able to have you in the room with me today and be able to talk to you.
Yeah, it's good. It's excellent. I mean, just having that face-to-face interview is really good. I don't mind the Zoom thing at all, but having the face-to-face interview is really good.
Nice.
So, I'm looking forward to it.
So
thank you for asking.
What I'll do, and one of the things that really connects or resonates with me and resonates with a lot of the stories that I have and a lot of women I'm around is the fact that because I'm a black woman talking, other black women are coming up to me and having conversations, and I'm having the most amazing connections and conversations with women just because I've dared to stand out. So it's going to be interesting to see how this interview goes and what comes out of it, because one of the things I'm looking at with my tree of the circle, if you can have a tree in a circle, is the women of colour's experience. And I'm really looking at culture and religion, because those are the two things that really, certainly from my experience, that really play out in our ability to talk.
Oh, definitely.
Before we start, before we get into it, Hanifa, can you introduce yourself to our audience?
Yeah. Okay then. So I'm Hanifa, as Yvonne has said, and I'm a social worker by profession, but I'm also a life coach. I'm also an author. I'm an author of 2 books, and one about stress and one about it's a book of my poetry. I live in Luton, and I've lived here for about 20 years, and previously lived in London. I'm of Jamaican heritage. I have a big family, and so thankful for their support and the relationship that we have. One thing that I suppose is important in my family relationship, and particularly in relation to what we're talking about here today, is that most of my family have children. Most of the women in my family, or indeed the men in my family, have children, and the one that doesn't. So I'm the auntie that doesn't have children. So it can make for very interesting, unspoken conversations between us. And it's brought out a lot of, it's made me think a lot and made me reflect a lot on my experience as a childless woman in a family, a black family, where there are lots of children. I have a little nephew. I was with him yesterday. He's 1. Lovely little soul, but certainly when I hold him, I every time I have that pang again. He reminds me of what I'm holding, so what I have, but also what I don't have.
Yeah. So
that's I'm often brought back to my senses, if you like, about childlessness.
Yeah, I think the family side of things is one of the aspects that I've heard a lot of from women of colour. Yeah. From black women, Asian women, because our families are so large and they're so extended.
Yes.
So there is this feeling the difficulties of going to family events, because knowing it's so big, so extended, and all of them have children as well, it can be really difficult. I've certainly experienced it. I have 2 brothers, both of them have kids. I'm a middle child, and I always have this sense of, what am I bringing? I don't have a place anymore.
That's right. What are you
and it's
bringing
really
to the
hard
table?
to go and be there and hear my parents talk about the grandkids, have these wonderful stories about the grandkids, and know that they're never going to have those stories of mine. The other thing that resonated with me, and actually that I was reminded of when you were just relaying that story, was talking to a friend. And I've told you this story before, but talking to a friend who was talking about his son, and the joy he had on his face when he was talking about the experience. I just broke down crying because I just, in that moment, I realised I'm not going to have those stories, and it brought so much sadness as much as joy, because it was nice that he was sharing that experience with me, but I was equally sad because I couldn't share it back.
I understand that.
And I think that moves me nicely onto my first question, because I would like to know, what has been your hardest thing on your childless journey?
Do you know, Yvonne, I think the hardest thing is acceptance. Accepting that this is my experience. And for many years, of course, I didn't accept it. And I come back to the conversation you started with about the meeting where you were talking about your book and your experience. And it was literally in that moment that I realized I have to accept this. This is something, I don't even know if I got to that point of I have to accept it, but I realized I will never have children. And you were telling my story that I will never have children. And it was almost like, this is something that, this is big. This is big. I've never had the opportunity, I've never taken the opportunity of expressing that, acknowledging it, and definitely not accepting it. So that's the biggest part of my journey, acceptance. Acceptance
I think
of what will not be.
It is a place that many women find hard to get to as well. Because we don't want to. We want to sit in the hope of it can happen. And it can happen in whatever way, IVF, adoption, whatever route we decide to take. It's going to happen. So it is hard. I think acceptance is probably the hardest place to be. I know from my experience, and also because I facilitate workshops for women of colour, the Reignite weekend workshops, I've heard many stories from other women as well. And I've recognised that acceptance is that place where people question, if I can get to acceptance, did I really want to have a child in the first place? So you were talking about your experience of getting to acceptance, and I remember from our conversations that we've had in the past, religion was part of that. So I'm very curious to hear about your experience. So as a woman of colour, but also as a Muslim woman, coming to terms, or actually not even coming to terms, because maybe that wasn't what was happening at the time, but being in this place where you felt, actually, I accept. And I'm going to use accept in inverted commas, because sometimes we think we've accepted something, and then later on the line we're like, oh, we didn't really accept it, now we're dealing with it. So from just taking you back in that time, as a woman of colour and as a Muslim woman, how did religion and culture play out on your journey of being a childless woman?
And so I'll go back just a little, take a step back a bit, because of course I grew up in a very a strong Christian home, strong Christian family. So, and I reverted to Islam at a later stage in my life. So both in my family home, and as I said, I come from a traditional Jamaican family, part of a traditional Jamaican family, and there was a kind of unwritten acknowledgement, an expectation in my family, growing up in our family, that of course you get married and you'll have children. It's all, you don't even discuss it. It's going to happen. It's just a question of when.
It's true. So that is true.
Because we women, we have babies. It's almost like, what else are you here for? No one's actually said that, but it's definitely seen as an important role for the Black woman. So as in my life as a Christian woman, growing up in a Christian home, then moving on to Islam, when I reverted to Islam, again, there was that expectation as well amongst sisters about having children. And there is, in fact, it goes beyond, it goes beyond expectation. It's like an assumption. So sister, how many children do you have? How many babies do you have? Well, not babies now, but how many children do you have, sister? And of course, wherever I've gone and wherever I said to sisters, I don't actually have children, it's almost like, oh, step back, oh, what? Okay, so how do we deal with this one? Because it's almost like people don't have a language, particularly in Islam. There is no language, there's no response to, I don't have children. There's no, it's almost like there is no response, because the expectation and the assumption is so huge and so fixed and so embedded in the culture and the religion that I don't even know what to say to someone who hasn't had children, apart from, okay, and walk away. So that's been quite an interesting experience. I've had quite interesting experiences with sisters who've made those sorts of assumptions, but actually don't want to then have a conversation, find it difficult then to have a conversation. And I understand that, because for many years I told myself this story about, well, there were two or three key things I used to say to myself. Every woman can't have a child, that's for sure. I mean, and I'm just one of those chosen women, because I can't. I'm just one of those women who has another role to play. Every woman can't have a child, because if every woman had a child, what would the world be like? Then, as far as religion's concerned, it was, well, God, Allah, didn't choose me to have children. He had another role in mind for me. So that wasn't his will. It's God's will that I don't have children. So I'm happy with that. I'm fine with that. You know, that's God's will. I'm fine with that. And I told myself that story over a period of years through Christianity and into Islam. But I realized it's not, I was lying to myself. I've now realized and definitely accepted that. And it was such a huge thing for me to even say, for me to utter those words. Actually, that is not true. I no longer believe that it was God's will for me not to have children. I'm not buying into that. So I've made lots of leaps and discoveries, and I'm still making discoveries about my place in terms of, and my thinking in terms of my childlessness and my religion and my culture. But I'm so glad I've actually at least started on this journey. So the one thing, when it comes to acceptance, just going back quickly to that, when it comes to acceptance, I've accepted that this is not going to be my experience. This is not going to be my experience, and so now there are further steps in this journey to go. So that's it's quite an exciting ride now that I've actually let go of some of those old beliefs.
It's actually nice to hear you say it's an exciting ride. Because one of the things I experienced with religion, and I'm not saying this from a point of criticism, because I know, being someone who experienced being in a charismatic church for over 10 years, I understand the comfort it can give.
That's a good word.
It's similar to kind of some of the things you were saying about when you create a story. So there, you know, the reason why we create stories is because we want to protect ourselves, and we give ourselves this comfort. So it wasn't God's will for me to have a child. It's a comfort, and it stops you from experiencing the pain of, oh, I'm not going to have children,
100%.
Because that can really suck, and it really does. We know this.
It's like a hit to the stomach, really, when you actually embrace that. Oh my goodness me, to let it go.
Tough.
To let go of that.
It is really tough. You're right.
It's
to
so
let
tough.
it, to let that pain go is a huge step forward. One of the things I found, so I'd come out of the church and prior to my childless journey, but had a lot of experience around that actually impacted then on how I grieved. And I found that when I came out and I was talking to people about my childlessness and asking questions, especially people who were in the church setting, it was like they wanted to keep me in denial, so keep me in hope. You know? So there was a lot of keep praying, and don't give up hope, and then or I had, maybe it's God's will, or God knows best, God knows what he's doing. And I found those both equally as difficult, because I was already in a place where actually I was moving more into acceptance, because I was working through my grief and trying to get to that place where it was going to be okay for me. So it's hard to hear someone say keep trying, because you're like, well, it's not that's not where I'm at anymore. So they want to keep pulling you back. But on the other side, even though I'm moving to this place of acceptance, I couldn't hear maybe it's God's will, because I just turned around and said, well, didn't God think I was good enough to be a mum then?
Yeah. Oh, wow. Yeah.
So this is where I can see religion can have this unhelpful place.
Sure. Yeah.
Because it doesn't then allow women to openly talk about the sadness they're experiencing. And some women wouldn't identify it as grief straight away. Some, you know, like for me, someone told me I was grieving. So when you feel the sadness, but you don't have the language to explain it.
Yeah.
If you can't then just say this is what it is, and people allow it, how do you get the help? And that's what I find in religious settings.
Sure. Yes.
Is preventing women from doing.
Preventing women from doing, and therefore from moving forward. Yeah. Because something that as you were talking there, something that I thought about and I realised also has been part of my journey, is that I actually believed that I was being punished because I'd lost one child, and I also had a termination. And it's quite, and even for me to sit here and say this on camera, for me to say this is quite huge, because it's not something that I have in the past been comfortable in saying because of the shame. The shame. I mean, imagine saying she had a termination, oh my gosh, and she lost a child, oh my gosh. But actually that is the reality. That's what actually happened to me. And then in terms of religion, I saw that also as part of God's punishment. So not only was it God's will for me to not have children, as I was before I'd had children, well, it must be God's will. Then when I became pregnant and then had those two experiences, losing one and then terminating another, that's my punishment. That's God's punishment. And you know, you have to live with that. And can you imagine carrying those emotions, that guilt, and that almost self-dislike, self-hate, because of what I'd done. I was being punished by the God that I love. That's just some kind of crazy.
Do you know, it is a kind of crazy, and it's a kind of crazy that I've experienced myself. So I completely understand that.
Yes.
And it's one of those things that I'm very conscious of, or more conscious of now, because I understand women are stuck in those places. You know, again, I'm not saying this is not, I don't want to criticize the church environment, because I do understand the comfort it gives. And also the joy. You know, I had some great times when I was in the church. But I worry how silencing it can be. For many women, for all the things you've just described.
It shuts you down, because who wants to be seen as a bad person, as a person who's done this awful thing? Who wants to? So it's easier for me to see that as my punishment. So, and you know, again, as like you said, not criticizing any faith, belief, religion, but this was my personal experience and my personal belief, that I was being punished by God. But I realised that's not the case. I know that's not the case.
I think there's so much joy in actually realising that, and so much release and freedom.
It's very liberating. Very liberating.
One of the things that I will always take with me, and I do relay this story, and it's one that you told me every time I talk to women, is that, especially when it comes to religion, is that if God didn't want you to have children, why would he allow you to get pregnant only to lose the child?
And exactly, it just is so, again, that's some kind of crazy. What sense would that make? But as you rightly said, the way we comfort ourselves, which is part of the grief that we're expressing, but we're not expressing actually, the way we comfort ourselves is, well, I'm punishing, I'm being punished, it wasn't his will. But this whole thing about, well, why would I be allowed to get pregnant then? What, just to lose it? No, it doesn't make sense, and it doesn't honour the God that I serve. You know, so this is all in my head, and all about my comfort, and not having a vehicle until now, not having a vehicle to express my true feelings. So.
See, one of the things that helped me when it came to religion was actually I changed my whole definition of God, and I reframed what he meant for me. And that really helped me to be able to move and work through my grief, because there was a lot of shame. Now, you have mentioned the shame. Where do you think that comes from? Because I think culturally there is a lot of emphasis on shame.
I think it comes from the culture. certainly in Jamaican culture, and I can't speak for every Jamaican family, I can't speak for every Jamaican person, I'm just saying that in terms of my home and my upbringing, my life, as I mentioned earlier, there was this expectation that you simply, once you grow up, you get married, you have babies. And if you're not having babies, what's wrong with you then? There must be something wrong with you. You're a healthy woman, you are of age, there must be some, so it's you. There's something wrong with you. So that there's that piece of shame that happens. Then the idea of having a termination or losing a child, more shame again, because how could you do something like that? You're a bad person. So more shame piled on top of that. Now it did happen to me, obviously. I was not married at the time. So I'm sure, I expect there were people in my family who knew what was happening to me, what had happened to me, that were sort of looking at me a bit oddly. She's not even married and she's had these babies, let alone getting pregnant, let alone having relationships, let alone having babies. And then we can't even go there with her at all. But I had this sense that I was being, this sense of shame, and therefore not being able to share my feelings, my experience with them, what I was going through with them, because of the shame I felt. And I carried that around with me for years. It would be shameful. The termination was an absolute no-no. I only told my sister about that about 2 years ago. And this is something that happened 30 odd years ago. And that's a long, long time.
Yeah, we carry a lot.
Yeah, literally.
I mean, I know, and it's something I talk about, is growing up.
Yeah.
My parents are Dominican and Trinidadian. So growing up, I heard a lot of messages of don't bring shame in the family, don't talk about your business. So I think anything that goes against what our parents have considered right, and generationally there's always this is right, this is right, this is right. So I certainly had this sense of, and I heard messages of, do it my way and you won't be wrong, and this is the right way, it's almost like, here's the box, here's a wonderful box,
here's the template,
if you stay here, you'll be fine.
Of course.
And of course life isn't like that, and we're young people, we want to experience stuff. We don't want to listen to the old focus.
No, I want to do it my way. I'm coming
and
with
when
new
we
stuff.
step out of that, and it goes wrong, what do we do? Because we can't. We're immediately silenced, because also it's a shame of actually we've disobeyed them.
Of course.
And it has gone wrong.
You didn't follow the script.
I know, and these are powerful words, because it's words I don't like to use anymore. I certainly have changed my language and how I talk about things. This is what we had, and therefore it's such a silencing experience.
It is, and in that silence, I always have this image of myself in my silence, holding on to my grief, and not just the silence, but the sadness that caused me. But I had nowhere to go with it. Nowhere to go with it. So I know that I'm still on my journey. But I'm so glad that I got on the bus. I am so glad I got on the bus.
You bought that ticket.
I did buy that ticket, and I am so glad. That's why I say I'm enjoying this ride, because it's so liberating. There's pain still. There's still sadness. There's still pain. Yesterday I was with my nephew. My nephew's son, and but I have a different kind of experience now.
So with all that you just said, what would you say to childless women or people based on what you now know?
I would say, first of all, this is not something to be ashamed of. Our childlessness is our experience, not shame. Our childlessness is a very personal experience as well, and I would discourage us from comparing ourselves with other people. Also, our childlessness is not understood by a lot of people. So being aware of that, I think, is important. I wouldn't have thought like this before, but our childlessness is not understood by a lot of people. So be open and embrace other people's lack of understanding, and understand your own experience. Don't criticize others for not understanding yours. Understand your own experience, and maybe it'll be easier for you to share your experience with others who want to know, who are curious about why we are childless women. And understand that there is a life beyond childlessness. We can enjoy a life beyond being childless, but also accept our childlessness, embrace the emotions, and if necessary, if we need to get help with that, going on our journey, get help. But this is not a thing of shame. This is an experience of to be celebrated, because we are women in the first instance. We're women of colour, proud, strong women of colour in the first instance.
That's lovely. That's beautifully put. So just thinking around that, how would you describe the person you are now compared to the person you were back then?
Wow, what a wonderful question. I love that question. So the person I was, when I look, I'll describe it this way. I look at myself as like a flower that is closed and hasn't opened. The sun hasn't come up. The rain hasn't hit it yet. So it hasn't been watered. It hasn't been fed. So I look at myself like that before. Now I look at myself as the flower that is blossoming, blooming, and all my essences, my fragrances, my colours, my beauty are just beginning to emerge as a result of my being willing and able and encouraged and supported to go on my journey.
That's beautiful.
And continue my journey of acceptance. And it is, I am so looking forward to see this flower in full bloom, this flower called Hanifa in full bloom, because she needs to be out there now. And other people need to see her colour, smell her essence, her fragrance, and watch her and be a part of her, continue to be a part of her growth. And I'm so thankful for all of those people, including yourself, Yvonne, that are part of that process of watering this flower called Hanifa.
It is so lovely to be a part of your journey as well.
It's so beautiful.
It really is. Because I'm really going to stick to time this time, I tend to overrun with all my interviews. So I'm going to ask you one last question. What does your plan B or alternative plan A look like now?
My plan B is really very much about continuing my journey, not allowing myself and not allowing the voices in my head, or indeed the voices outside of my head, to take me off of my journey. My plan B is to continue on the road that I have embarked on now. Do it with courage, with openness, embrace it, and all that comes with it. The sadness, the pain, the joy, the fulfillment. My plan B is to continue my journey.
Do you know, that's so wonderful. I think we get so caught up in the failure, the shame, the stuff that can derail us. But we don't realise actually those are the things that can empower us and propel us forward, because all it takes is for us to use it all. Life happens, the crappy stuff is there. But I think if we really embrace it and just remember, failure is there to inform you to move in a different direction.
Oh wow, that's lovely.
And I heard that from Oprah and a Brené Brown interview. I just loved it. I'm going to say it again. Failure is there to inform you to move in a different direction.
I just love that. I've got to learn that one. Yeah.
And I think with all of that, the magic happens.
The magic happens. It's almost like the flower, but the opening up and being watered, opening up, that's the magic. And I so love that. Can I just say very quickly, another part of my plan B will involve using my poetry to express my feelings about the experience from my point of view of being a childless woman, and sharing sharing that,
Yeah.
my feelings and my emotions about that.
And Hanifa's poetry is amazing. It really is.
Thank you so much.
She is,
Thank
and she's
you.
even gifted me with
Yes.
a couple. So
Yes,
I've been
thank
so
you.
honoured to
Yeah.
be able to experience
I'm thankful for
your
giving
poetry
me the
from you.
opportunity to do that.
And Hanifa can be found on Facebook.
Yes, I can.
So
Facebook.
if anyone wants to follow
Hanifa
her
Muhammad,
and
yes.
follow, catch up with her poetry.
Yes. So you can go to www.goodforthesoul.blog. You can follow my poetry on that blog, and I hope you enjoy. Please do.
So on that note, I'm going to thank you, Hanifa, for being part of my interview circle. It's been such an honour and an inspiration to hear your beautiful story. Thank you for sharing it. Thank you for all those who've tuned in to listen. I hope you've been as inspired as I have. So for now, I'm going to sign out, and I'll see you on the next interview. So hi, I'm here with Ruth Levy-Abrasom, who I met through the Gateway community. Ruth has kindly agreed to be interviewed as part of mine and Meryl's interview circle. And as you know, I'm looking at the Women of Colours experience. I thought it'd be really interesting to speak to Ruth, because Ruth is a Jewish lady. I've not spoken to a Jewish lady about childlessness before, so it'd be really great to see her perspective on her experience as a childless woman, her experience as a Jewish childless woman, and actually to see the similarities that I face as a woman of colour through my childless journey as well. So let me introduce Ruth. And Ruth, can I ask you to start by telling us who you are?
Who am I is a huge question these days, actually. Yeah, who am I? I love being referred to as the Jewish lady. That's awesome. My name is Ruth, as you know already from Yvonne, and I actually am a childless, not by choice woman. I'm currently living in Israel, and I'm the host of Gateway Women Israel, the first and only, to my knowledge, group for women who are childless, not by choice, in Israel. And I spent most of my life living in New York City. So I'm transitioned over here to Israel more recently.
I mean, I'm sure there's going to be a lot of things that come out of this, especially with your experience of living in New York and your experience of living in Israel, which I can imagine is poles apart.
Yeah.
So I just want to start by asking, what's been the hardest thing about your childless journey?
Yeah, so, you know, there's been so many things that have been hard that it's almost impossible for me to pick the number one hardest. I think, I mean, there's been so much pain around it, literally physical pain, medical trauma, physical pain. There's been a tremendous amount of emotional pain and anguish, and there's been a tremendous amount of spiritual pain. And you know, it's been incredibly difficult to figure out, you know, why this is happening, what to do about it, how I fit in, not only in the Jewish community, but in the world at large, and what I want to do with my life if I'm not going to be a mother. It's really brought up every kind of old baggage that existed, every other grief, tremendous amount of this sense of like lowered confidence, lowered self-esteem. You know, talk about like fear of missing out, like FOMO, but much more in the sense of like, wow, I'm missing out on this very basic thing that women all over the world get to do without a second thought. Really feeling disconnected from humanity in a sense. Like I had an experience where, you know, I love being in nature and taking trips into nature. And I thought, oh, it'd be so healing for me to just get as far away from everything as possible. And it was, springtime, and the animals that I went to see were all having their babies and nursing their young. And I was like, even bison is able to reproduce. It was everywhere. It was little bear cubs and their mamas, and the tour guides were like, look at the mamas and the little bears. And I'm like, I can't get away. No. There's no escape. There is no escaping this. Even if you're not near a single other human soul, there is a bird and her little birds, and there's, a cat and her kittens, and it's everywhere. And so to feel left out of that part of life has been very hard. So I can't pick like the one hardest, and they're all interconnected.
And I think what you've described is actually what all of us go through, what all of us experience as childless women. And it's that experience that others who have children don't seem to comprehend or understand. So I think it's so important to be able to talk about it. And I've heard you talk about it on Jodie's platform when she talked about the diversity with childlessness. And, it was so eloquently put. And actually you just mentioned as well about the stuff from your background that came, because I think that's another thing, a part of the grief process, is that all this stuff from our background, whether it's cultural or personal stuff that we've experienced, suddenly hits you in this wave, and you're like, what do I do with this now? And actually I wondered for you what that felt like.
Like what came up in addition to all of this? I mean, so much. I mean, what I forgot to mention even is just that it's also was very hard on my career, not to mention finances, but my career itself, because I had been thinking all my life, I'm going to do this kind of work, and that's going to support me when I'm going to be a mother. Like I geared all of my thinking to the point where everything ends as I know it, and then I become a mother, and then my other life begins, kind of. And then that doesn't happen, and then you're kind of left holding the pieces of like, what's going on here. But, asking, like you were asking, what else from my background started to come up? I mean, everything, especially around friendships, because friendships with other women, at one point we're all single, at another point everybody has their relationships, and then friendships and people, they move on and they get married and they start having children and they move, and feeling left behind from all of that brought back so many feelings, insecurities from my past of like, feeling like I'm not as good, I'm not measuring up, I can't compete, I'm not their level, I'm not doing anything with my life, they're doing important things, what am I doing? Just a lot of feelings of like not knowing how to proceed, and feeling extremely isolated and lonely with it, and shut down. It was the first time that I ever experienced something that I felt was so impossible to talk about. Other problems, I felt like it was something I could bring up. But I think because this problem had to do with an intimate part of my life, very private information, I felt that even with my best girlfriends, I felt shut down around it. I felt embarrassed. So it brought up this sense of separation from others, and also a separation from God, in a sense. I mean, when I married, and a little before I was married, I became more observant in Judaism. And the reason for that was my hopes and dreams to have a Jewish family, to have a lot of kids, and to have the kind of beautiful family that I wanted. I came from a broken family. So I wanted that, and I wanted to repair all of that stuff from the past, and I wanted a chance, to do that, and it didn't happen.
Yeah, there's so many things that you're saying. It's just reminding me, because I mean, in a way, further along in my journey of childlessness and talking about it than you are. And it's really great to actually have you on this platform.
This is literally the second time I'm talking about this.
Well, one of the things, I'm so grateful that you've agreed to do it. And I know how nervous you were about talking, which is a huge thing. I think, you know, us being able to say that shows how much of a huge thing it is for women like us to say we're in this situation.
That's exactly it, because there's so much shame associated with it. Why is there so much shame associated with it? It's unbelievable. That's why it's taken this long.
Yeah.
Why is it so impossible to talk about? What's the?
You know, I found it. I mean, it's ridiculous, really. It's one of the most.
It's ridiculous, totally.
It's such a normal thing, you know, and given that 1 in 5 women, certainly in the UK, between the ages of 44 and 45, 42 and 45, I'm sure I've got those stats wrong. But if you look at the stats, that 1 in 5 of us are childless by circumstance. So it's more common that people realise, but why is there so little conversation around it? You know, I did notice how little we talk about it, or I certainly talked about it with my friends. I know childless friends. I have childless friends, and even those friends I wasn't talking to about it. And I remembered there was a time when I thought, hang on, when I was in my grief, or coming through my grief and being better at owning what I was feeling and talking about it, that I thought, hang on a minute, I don't even know why they're childless, or what their stories are, or what their journeys are around it, which really interested me. And then I started to go back and talking to them about it. But, you know, just thinking about what you said about feeling separated from your friends, what I realised is that I didn't have a language to understand what I was feeling, let alone tell people what I was feeling. Because I sat there going, why am I so sad about this? Because I was quite ambivalent about being a mum, but I really questioned, why am I so sad about this? I was surprised that I was so sad about it. And then it was about trying to understand that grief. So I had to really unpack it for myself before I can then sit in a room and explain that to other people, because people don't accept you're childless not by choice. You're sad about it without needing that explanation.
Right, or without giving advice that they're in no position to give. I mean, one of the reasons it was so hard to talk about is because whenever I risked talking about it with someone, whenever I really opened up and said, you know, and by the way, you know, we really are struggling. We're struggling. I got advice that was so, you know, go take a vacation to Thailand. You just need to relax. Go sit on the beach a little. Or I really, literally, from the same person, got, why don't you do it from behind? No joke. Literally, that's what she said. Very intelligent, loving, sensitive woman said that to me because she said that's what worked for her. So in a sense, this was essentially a moment where I guess we were connecting on something. She was admitting something to me and being vulnerable in order to help me. But from where I was standing, I was like, are you out of your mind to say this to me? Like, do you know anything about infertility?
my best story I heard was, why don't you take a year off work so that you can relax and then, you know, really try? But yours trumps mine. By far, yours does trump mine.
The idea that you should stop your entire life to get pregnant while other women get pregnant completely by accident, you know, or God forbid, you know, by force.
Yeah, yes.
These are not, you don't get pregnant or not pregnant due to this like stress. Do you know, this idea that you need to stop everything in order to try to get pregnant, I feel is very frustrating to me.
Yeah. I mean, again, it becomes ludicrous why people think that one piece of advice is the one piece of advice that you need to hear and that's going to work for you, because it worked for me. You know, it's baffling. It really is baffling.
Yeah.
Oh.
In the Jewish world, there's an endless array of superstitious things that people will say to you and advise you to do when you're not having luck around fertility. And, you know, also those things became just so, almost like, is it the right word, like platitudes, or this kind of dismissive, like, we want to help, so let's just throw out anything we've ever heard of and you better appreciate it, or what's wrong with you? You know, hey, what did I do? I just suggested some absurd thing that has nothing to do with it because I don't know what's actually going on. You know, it was very, the point of what I'm saying is really just that once that happens a couple of times, what happened to me was I stopped. I just simply shut down. I'm too afraid to expose this most tender, painful thing to anyone because I don't want anyone to hurt me. I'm already hurt and I can't bear a single other comment. And the other thing that happened around it was kind of this isolation, this closing in on myself, where everywhere became a potential trigger. I needed to protect myself from this person, from this situation, from this holiday, from this sidewalk, from this gym where moms are taking their kids to the swimming class at this time. I need constant, you know, I need to not go to the candy area I need to, you know, never go to the supermarket in the morning hours when it's moms and babies. All kinds of tiny things that basically add up to life that became very, very difficult to manage. And because it's like a very disenfranchised grief, I didn't even know myself what was happening. And I felt very guilty all the time at not being the friend and the person I wanted to be, for being jealous that other women were having babies. I didn't know what to do with the level of anger that I felt towards these women and just envy. You know, they would be women who weren't even married after I was married for 8 years. You know, they had just gotten married and would show up with a baby. And I'd just be like, I shouldn't, this has nothing to do with me. But I found that, like, I couldn't even go to synagogue anymore. I couldn't participate in events because even if I went with all of my good intentions and with all positivity and ready to just try to accept and be a peaceful, loving human being, something would always come out of nowhere and knock me to the ground. So I learned not to talk about it, not to go out, not to try to get out of social situations. Everything felt like a landmine, like the world was a landmine. And, you know, it's only beginning to shift. It's only beginning to shift.
Yeah.
But I had a lot of remnants of that. It's very much in process for me still.
Yeah. I mean, you described so beautifully, again, what other women are going through. But I think that whole depiction of being this whole person who is in a place where the whole world is in front of you, you know, all your hopes and dreams, you can still get them. And then reaching that point where one of those dreams is not going to be fulfilled, and that the demise of you as a person and everything about you into this silence in place because of how people treat you or perceive you or what they say to you in those circumstances, when actually all you wanted was a hug. All you wanted was the acknowledgement of, yeah, this is really crap and I'm really sorry you're going through it.
Yes. The only answer to all of this, like the only thing I feel like would have helped me in those moments is like, that sucks.
Yeah.
I just wanted someone to be like, that sucks, and not give me advice. And, you know, and you know, the idea that like they got pregnant because they did X, Y, and Z also felt very embarrassing to me.
Yeah.
Like, you know, especially like being newly married and being very protective of my private life, you know, my romantic life, and feeling like I'm not opening this up to anybody. And it felt very intrusive for someone to give me sex advice on how to get pregnant, you know, who wasn't asked. and also had no qualifications to give that advice.
Well,
it was bad enough having doctors intrude.
Yeah. I mean, there's a saying. I mean, as you were saying that, I just thought, oh, you're doing sex wrong. You know, I don't know how you do sex wrong, really. But, you know, in my mind, hearing that is somebody telling you you're doing it wrong. Yeah. So here's the right way to do it. And again, as you said, it doesn't make any sense.
In religious Jewish life, there is literally books about women's bodies, about menstruation, about sexuality, large books that are studied over thousands and thousands of years that have to do with women's cycles and that have to do with you know, when it's appropriate to have sex with your husband and when it is forbidden to have sex with your husband. And in between that is the time where you are immersed, you go and immerse in what's called a ritual bath. And at that time, when you do that, when you return from that ritual bath, you shift status from being, you know, not available for sexual activity to being available. And the moment that you go to that ritual bath is timed around what is considered to be your ovulation time. So, or, you know, which is very remarkable in a certain sense, that this is a very ancient practice and one that, you know, was promoted because they understood that there's periods of time when a woman might get pregnant and might not, and so on. But at the same time, Jewish women who are observant and who go to this ritual bath on a monthly basis are kind of, not only did they get their period again, it didn't work again, but then they also have to go and immerse in this ritual bath, which is on some levels a very cleansing, beautiful experience, a spiritual experience. And on another level is just a reminder that you didn't get pregnant again. And it not only are you bleeding again, but you know, mid-month, you have to go to a ritual bath. And to go to a ritual bath, you need to have the understanding that, okay, after I come out of here, I have to try again, right? We have to try again. I'm allowed now to have sexual relations. And the cycle of it is almost a double whammy, because the first time you realize you're not pregnant is when you see the blood. But then it's not over. Then you have to go through the experience of, you know, 10 to however many days, it's a whole thing of when you actually go to the ritual bath. But then you have to go and do this again, just, you know, immerse in the water, just so that you will be ready to return to marital relations. And so it's like every part of your month, right, has a part in it that is a re-trigger. You know what I mean? And it's almost, it's difficult to share this kind of thing because it's so little known outside of the religious world that this is what is the practice for thousands of years. This is our tradition, right? But there is a kind of double whammy factor in it, where, you know, the second you realize it didn't happen, you know, you have to go through this next month, right? And going to the immersive bath is, you know, every time you go, you see the attendant who's there. So it's like this silent thing of like, yep.
Yeah, you're back again.
But we can't discuss anything because everything is hush-hush. And there's no acknowledgement that you have been here every single month for years, while women who become pregnant don't go anymore during their entire pregnancy, right? So until they give birth, they're not there. So it's a big part of being a religious Jewish woman is that practice, and it's never discussed because it is such a private, intimate thing that really only a very small group does and knows about.
Yeah. So culturally, being from the Caribbean, I'm not aware, and I certainly don't have in my immediate culture any rituals in that sense. But I'm aware that in African cultures there are. But what it reminds me of is just the sense of prayer, because you could almost argue that prayer is a ritual. You know, I want to have something, I take it to prayer. I have I might have a prayer group that I'm in, and therefore we're all together, we're praying for it, we're coming together and in a way having that ritual of having the like mind and commonality of that one thing that we're praying about to end in the baby, in the pregnancy. And in that same sense, I'm hearing you speak, and I'm thinking, from that sense, I feel like it's the same thing in respect to I'm taking myself to prayer, I'm offering up this, I'm whatever that means for you in that terms, because there's different ways to pray, and there's different, sometimes there are rituals involved with prayer. You might bring an offering, you might do this, depending on the setting it's in. But again, it's that, and it didn't work, and then I come back and it didn't work, and I come back and it didn't work. And I kind of feel like, and I know for me, and hearing the things that I've experienced through Christianity, is that I feel like we didn't want it enough, because that's kind of the message that came back to me. And you didn't pray hard enough, you didn't have enough hope, you didn't want it enough. And I wonder what sense you had from all of this. And because you did mention the separation from God, and you mentioned what I have come to believe as spiritual trauma from your experiences. So just wonder what that all meant for you.
Yeah, it's deep stuff. It's really deep stuff. I do agree with you. Spiritual trauma exists, and I think the idea of being not enough, not having done enough, not having wanted it enough. I felt very much that it wasn't spoken about in a very public way, but the message that I got was that having a family, having children is the number one most important thing that you should do. That being married and having children is the number one important thing. And there is nothing more important and more valued than bringing up a Jewish family. And as a result, you should be willing to do anything to make that happen. And if you're not going to go to the nth degree to make this happen, if you don't sacrifice everything, whether it's your emotional state, your finances, your career, your physical body, if you are not willing to put your physical body through cycle after cycle after cycle of invasive procedures or hormones or whatever, if you don't do that, you didn't really do it. You didn't really try. And the shame of not doing, or the shame of feeling that maybe somebody else did more and that's why they got it, versus I didn't do enough and that's why I didn't get it. I think that's really real. And in Judaism, there's a very big emphasis on you don't just pray. You have to act. You have to take action to get the things that you are wanting in life. So you don't just pray the bus will come, you pray for the bus and you run for the bus. Otherwise, what did you do? So in the idea of infertility or childlessness, and even, from my single religious Jewish friends, a tremendous pressure, all right, well, let's go, find someone already. yeah, but I haven't found the right guy. I want to have a family with the right guy. Ugh, just settle already. You're too picky. Just do it already. You know,
Yeah.
this idea that there is no excuse to not do anything. And for people who, you know, are able to be aware of, are sensitive enough, I feel like, to be aware of the ambivalence sometimes that there is around changing your life and becoming a mother. Like, if it happened naturally, that's one thing. But it brings up the ambivalence to here, you know, to 11, when not only are you afraid, not only is this a huge life change, not only all those things, but also now you have to like do it in these ways that require you to do things that no one else has to do. They're challenging you in ways that you shouldn't have to be challenged, you know, in this way. And so I feel like there is a tremendous message of, you know, while there is a lot of kind of lip service to everyone is valuable and each individual is important and has a purpose in this world, and there's even a beautiful saying in Judaism of every blade of grass has its own song, which sounds so beautiful.
Yeah.
But it's not something that anybody would trade.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Nobody would be like, you know what, I'll just have my own song. Never mind, kids. I'll go my own way. It's such an important value to have children in Judaism that it's not only observant or religious Jews. In Israel, there's a 4 is the new 3 of secular people. That secular, non-religious people who are Jews are having 4 kids now, where in the past the average was more like 3. And Israel, to my knowledge, is one of the only Western countries where the birth rate is not dropping, where it's actually rising. And it's also, it has to do somewhat with the Arab population percentage in Israel, which is they're 20% of the population, and they do have large families, but it's just as much coming from the Jewish population, secular and religious, which are about 50-50 here, who are creating very large families. It's very deeply ingrained. And one of the things that always that I feel like, you know, is difficult for me around that, about the idea of pronatalism, which is this idea that, you know, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like it's like the main value is for a woman to have a baby, to be a mother. That's what the society wants. And I feel like the main issue that is problematic in Judaism around educating people about pronatalism is that we are such a small minority. You know, we're less than 1% of the population of the world. There's only about 14 million Jews in the entire world. You know, we were decimated during the Holocaust. We fight against every kind of persecution for thousands of years, and somehow we are still here. And the values of having a family and passing those traditions on, and the connection that Jewish religion and ethnicity has are one. They're one. So you're always Jewish, even if you are, you know, not practicing. This idea that you're always those kinds of, you're always connected with that sense of community and oneness with a people, because we are a people, not only a religion. That people has to be populated somehow. So I don't know, you know, in the future, even as a Gateway Women host here, you know, I so much want to come to a place where we can feel that, you know, we know our purpose, and we can educate people to be more sensitive and so on. But I think that ultimately acceptance right? Or thinking like, it's okay to end up like this. I don't know if that will ever be a value that can be, I mean, I feel like if I were to get up and speak, I would be a cautionary tale rather than an inspiration that I've managed to pick myself off the floor a little bit. It would be like, ooh, uh-oh.
Do you know,
don't end up
you've just reminded me, because I remember it might have been a couple of years ago now, but I was telling my story, and I remember a young black girl turning around and saying, "Oh, I better hurry up because I don't want to end up like you." And I was like, "What?" You know, and I think it is, as you said, it's very important that our voices are out there and our stories are out there. You know, I actually love that saying you said, every blade of grass has its own song, from the point of view that all our stories matter. For me, the beauty in that is that I matter too, and that I have a story and there's a purpose to me. It doesn't matter that I'm not a mum, because that's irrelevant. That's just a part of my journey. What matters is what's important is that I still matter, because I'm not a mum. And, you know, there's a lot of what you said that I'm sure women out there will identify with and are so grateful to have heard. What I would like to just touch on is, what would you say to other childless people based on what you now know?
It sucks. You know, when I was in the thick of it, and when I say in the thick of it, I mean when I was still hoping that it would work out. I was still hoping. There was still hope. Now there's no more hope. And that's actually what's helped me, is that the hope is finished. The ship has sailed. So now is the time when I'm sort of coming to terms and figuring out, oh, I need to have a plan B. But during the time that I was hoping, and that every month was maybe now, that was the hardest period. So, I mean, I don't have tremendous words of wisdom. I just know that the most important thing that helped me was reaching out, was being willing to join Jodi's online bee, was being willing to order books from Amazon written by childless, not by choice women, because I didn't know anyone like myself. I lived in New York City and I could not find an infertility support group. I went to one and it was completely overwhelming. It was like 15 women talking about the most scientific, latest, modern details of all these things that I was like, whoa, this is not what I need. What I need is to talk about this experience. And it was like science class. I was rejected from an infertility group and from an event because I wasn't religious enough. Yeah. So, I mean, just ridiculous things happened. So, you know, my whatever I would say is just, you know, when I was searching for help, I couldn't find anything about Judaism and infertility that didn't immediately relate to biblical stories of the matriarchs being infertile, or rabbis' commentaries on infertility treatments, or very punitive, horrible videos by male rabbis just saying things that were very hurtful around why people don't have children. And I couldn't find just like a regular person like myself talking about what it's like to be Jewish and childless, not by choice. I found that it was very like hush hush. Everything that existed was like, we're a secret and we're a group and we want to, you know, but it didn't have, I didn't find relief from any of it. And the closest I came to getting relief was in meeting other women online, you know, from all over the world, based on Jodi's book. That's where I started to really come out and share what really happened. The only other person in the world who knew what was happening to me was my husband. You know? And to be able to come out and share and hear other women and their stories was the single most important step that I took. So I would say, you know, to anyone listening to this, you know, get books, read, research other things that you can do so that you connect with people. You know, 5 years ago, if you had told me that I would be speaking to you right now about my childlessness, you know what I'm saying? Like that, I would not even imagine that I could do something like that. And it just seemed to me, I was so filled with shame and self-loathing that there was no way that I would have been able to even, you know, imagine something like this. So it's nothing is immediate, and it's hard, and it's painful. And sometimes complete strangers through a screen can bring about the most healing. And so I would just say to be willing and open to reaching out to maybe places that you would never imagine that you could get support and comfort. You know, it might be easier even to do that than to try to reach out to a friend or to a family member who's too personally involved in your story. You know, to be able to hear from other women that they too had to deal with stupid, mean comments, or that they too feel bad when they go to the supermarket and see, you know, pregnant women, and or they too don't know what to do about going to a family event where there's going to be so many kids, or, you know, they too are wondering, what the hell am I a woman for then? What am I doing with all these bits? What am I supposed to do with that now? You know, worrying about what's going to happen when I get older. All of these things, there's no one to talk to about this, but there is a community of people. And as soon as you tap into it, the healing will become much faster, and you'll even be able to laugh.
Yeah, it's definitely one of the things that childless women experience is, you know, will I have joy again? You know, I've had women contact me and ask me if the grief will ever end. So, you know, as you said, it is really important to be around the right people. Friends and family are great and they love us, so they don't want to see us be hurt, but that means they want to fix it. And it's almost like putting us in this denial and keeping us in this constant state of hope and denial that it's hard. We need to be away from that. We do need to be away from that so we can heal.
Totally. And also to be around people that are willing to bear the hardness.
Bear witness to it. Yeah.
Not just bypass it with like, chin up, everything's okay. Or my favorite, at least you have your health.
Yeah. Well, there's so many things. I know someone who told their sister, at least you've got a good job. It's like, oh yeah, that's not gonna help. Because you know, there's women that, you know, they've kind of stopped caring about life because they just want the baby. They'd give it all up for the baby. So, you know, as you said, it's so important, so important to reach out just to keep us whole and sane, really. You know, and thinking about all of this, I wonder, because again, you know, your journey has different to mine, but there's so many similarities in what you said that I can identify with. So I wonder how you would describe yourself as the woman then and the woman now.
I would say that at this point, you know, when I think back to that moment where I sat in the infertility support group and heard all these women talking about their medical details and, you know, this vitamin and that thing and the thing, I remember sitting there and the facilitator asked me, do you want to share anything? And this was after an hour and a half of just looking around at these women who had done everything under the sun to get pregnant, like extreme things that at least I felt at that point, like this was extreme. And I remember I said, well, I just believe that if God brought me together with my amazing husband, that he's, you know, that I just need to be patient and that he's going to make this happen for us. And, you know, I believe that it'll work out. I believe that everything will be okay. And I really meant it. And I felt very empowered in that moment. I thought, these poor women, they don't have enough faith. And now, now I look back at the Ruth who sat in that meeting. And I just want to say, you were so naive. You were so sweetly optimistic and hopeful that because you finally found your husband, that you were also going to have children, that God was right there with you and he was listening, and that he was to, you know, be a better Jew, do more mitzvot, be better, show God that I really, really, really want this and I'm ready. And I'm not going to need to do all of these things like these crazy women. I'm special. I'm different and I'm special and it's going to work out for me.
God loves you enough to give you everything. Yeah.
I'll get it. I'll get it. And one of the reasons I didn't even want to talk about it with anyone is because I only wanted to open up about how much we went through when we finally could show up with our little baby and then be like, oh,
of course,
what we went through. But first I wanted the baby and then I'll talk.
Yeah.
Now I feel that I don't have a lot of hope in that way. I'm not hoping. I'm not relying on this idea that God is looking out for me or that there's a power in the universe that is always doing good for me, even when I don't see it, or all of these kinds of things that are that there's sort of a direct relationship between me and what happens to me, and that prayer is very powerful to be able to get the things that you want, or doing good deeds, or doing the right thing. All of these things, I mean, I just simply don't believe them anymore. And my new belief system, if I have one, is just try to cope. Try to find what does work and try to cope with what is, and try to get help coping with what is. And where I find God these days, even though I don't call it that, is in communion with other people who understand, who can speak the truth, who aren't afraid to question, who aren't afraid to meet me in my grief, who aren't scared away if I'm cranky or negative, or I don't fall in line with the positivity, and I'm not interested in inspirational talks. And I find inspiration when other women are like typing on the online group, you know, had the shittiest day in the supermarket, guess what happened? I'm like, yes. And that's how life has changed for me. I'm no longer hoping that everything's going to work out and that everything is for good and that I have some sort of special relationship with God, or even just with life. Forget God. Just with life, that life is going to work out. I'm going to get everything. Everything's going to work. It's not that I thought that nothing was like perfect before, but I really, really had this sense that there was no way that I could be denied this. There was no way, you know, and the shock, the reality of life is that we don't always get what we want, and life can be extremely cruel and extremely heartbreaking, and then you die. So there's got to be a place in between where we find enjoyment with other people, and we do things that bring us joy and fulfillment. It's made me much more existential, much more sensitive towards other people and their pain and their plight. And it's also turned me vegan.
Really?
Yes. Realizing animals and the pain that they go through and the voicelessness of their situation They suffer and no one hears them. And I identified with that fully. They're victims that no one even thinks of as a victim. And they're denied life, and they're trapped in their conditions in the industries. So for me, I started to see that there's whoever is voiceless in our society, whoever doesn't have a way out, whoever doesn't have the ability to speak about the pain that they're going through, whoever society doesn't think about, you know, oh, we don't think about those people. Or even sitting in the synagogue, it's all about the people who are, you know, the families, the people with children, the people who are celebrating children and marriages and whatever they're celebrating, and everyone else is on the margins. And that's how the veganism thing came too, this idea of like, we don't even see, they're on the margins. We're not supposed to care about that. But realizing that there are brothers and sisters here just as much as human are.
Yeah.
And that was a huge shift for me. And I think it came from developing compassion for myself and for others, and including animals in that process. Yeah.
There's this real sense of, I mean, when I was just thinking about that, and, you know, I remember that, or, you know, for me, there's a lot of what you're saying is about, we're not taught certain things. And then becomes even in Christianity, it is all about the family. It's about having children. And again, we're on the periphery as well. Actually, I don't even think we're thought of, because it gets hidden in prayer. You know, go and pray about it, put yourself before God, and it will happen. But one of the things or a place I'm in now, is about, let's just allow everything to be what it is. And I find that if it is what it is, we have very different, more meaningful conversations around it. Pretty much what you're saying, because, you know, I'm childless, let's talk about it. I'm this, let's talk about it. I'm going through this, let's talk about it. I think if we stop labeling and stop making it right and wrong, it just is. Life is really crap sometimes. It just is. And we have much more deeper conversations around it. And I think, you know, that's where all the healing is. That's where the learning is. And without it, we do get stuck.
100%. And I think that it's so important that the taboo around it be lifted. And the only way that the taboo can be lifted is by talking about it, by being willing to step forward and be like, yeah, this is happening. I mean, I think that's it, is people are afraid of what they don't know. They don't understand. Why did this terrible thing happen? You know, I always say, like, you look like a nice Jewish couple. Where's your kids? Why don't you have kids? You know, well, what's going on here? How long have you been married? You know, what's going on? It's so inconceivable that, you know, people don't know what to make of it. And when they don't know what to make of something, we need to shut down. You know, I don't want to get cooties from you. Like, I don't want to, don't rub off on your bad luck. I don't want it near me. And talking about terrible things that happen, whether it's death or whether it's infertility or whatever terrible things happen, people are afraid to talk about it, I think, because not only are they afraid of saying the wrong thing, and they're afraid of this and they're afraid of that, but I think there is literally a superstitious thing of, I don't want your bad luck. I don't know if I want that near me. And I don't think anyone would really admit to it, but I do feel that it exists to a certain degree. There is in Judaism, on Yom Kippur, which is the Day of Atonement. It's the holiest day of the year, and there is a service during Yom Kippur where you're fasting, where there's a special prayer that you're invited to say that remembers and elevates the souls of the departed, of people who have died. And there is a superstition in the Jewish community that if you stay in the room while people are saying that prayer, that your parents could die. So literally, as the rabbi says, it's now time for the Iskor service, herds of people whose parents are living stand up and leave the room noisily, while the poor unfortunate souls who are praying for their immediate family's souls to be elevated in heaven are left. And every year when I saw that, I was like, this is horrible. What? This is so superstitious and horrible. Why not stay in the room, put an arm around the person who's grieving and say, I'm here for you. Who with this thing of running out of the door so that your bad luck doesn't rub off on me?
Yeah.
And infertility, I feel that if anyone dared, if there was a service about infertility, people would get up and go out. I wouldn't want it to happen to them.
Wow.
And I feel like that's something that, you know, I'm probably going to get a lot of grief for saying that, but I really do feel that there is a sense of fear and superstitiousness around when bad things happen to good people. No explaining it, and anything is like a platitude to try to explain it, and ultimately we don't have the answer. We don't know why terrible things happen to good people, and anyone who claims to know, you know, is wrong.
You know, it is what it is. Let's talk about it. That's what it comes down to. Yeah. Do you know what, Ruth? We've talked about so much in this conversation, and we've covered a lot of things, and we are running out of time. So I just want to quickly ask you, what does Plan B mean for you?
Plan B means talking to you.
Yeah.
It means doing the Gateway Women group in Israel. It means having written my first article about what it's like to be CNBC. It means creating community for myself, slowly but surely, of women who understand. And it means reevaluating everything in my life, what I do all day, how I think, what kind of spiritual life I want or don't want, what kind of situations I want to be part of, what kind I don't. And most especially, Plan B means really listening to myself and accepting how I am, and not judging or shaming myself for the things that I want and need, because ultimately I'm all I've got at this point. I need to do life in a way that makes sense for me, and I can't just gloss over the grief. You know, I can't just jump into, you know, one thing that Jody said that I really resonated with was like, oh, well, if you don't have kids, then you better be like some sort of huge CEO, or you better like save the world somehow, or find
become Mother Teresa,
Mother Teresa. And, you know, sometimes the thing that most annoys me in the world is when you see a woman who is saving the world and has 4 children and looks amazing and goes to the gym and cooks every week for 20 people dinner, you know, this kind of thing. Like, there are women like that, but that's by self-acceptance. Like, I probably won't be that woman.
Yeah.
And what woman am I? And who do I want to be? And what's the best I feel I can do? And if one day it looks like Netflix and potato chips, so be it. And if the next day it looks like I exercised and took a walk and connected with someone, then that's what it looks like. A lot more self-acceptance and willingness to go one day at a time.
Yeah, oh, I love that. Loving yourself for who you are. It's so beautiful. So we have to end there. I could talk to you for forever. And I do look forward to actually connecting with you again, because there is so much to your story and so much to your experience that I could just keep pulling out stuff from it. So I'm so grateful that you came on this conversation today.
I'm so grateful. Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, you're welcome. I've had so much fun, and I've learned, you know, a lot. I've been reminded of a lot for myself. And I really do look forward to talking to you again soon.
Ditto.
So for now, I will say goodbye. Hi, I'm Yvonne John, and I'm here with Sophia Ande as part of my interview circle, a project that I started with Muriel Whale a while ago. And thank you for joining me, Sophia. So I'd like to start by giving you just a couple of minutes just to introduce yourself and just to let the audience know how you've come to be childless.
Okay, thanks Yvonne, and thanks for asking me to participate. So in terms of my childlessness, my story is one probably that could be summed up by not meeting a life partner. And so my focus in my 20s was really around establishing a career. I had a mum who was very much about education and using education as a way to better yourself and to improve your circumstances. So I went to university, I studied to be a pharmacist, I joined the pharmaceutical industry, and that was my focus, you know. And my mum always gave the advice of being financially independent, don't rely on a man, make sure that you can look after yourself. And so that I really took that advice to heart, and that's what I was really focusing on for myself. So establishing myself, getting my own home, getting a good job, and getting that career. And also just, you know, when you're in your 20s, you're trying to find yourself as an adult in the world as well. And then in my 30s, I actually call my 30s, when I look back at it, as the lost decade. I feel like I completely sleepwalked through my 30s. I couldn't, if you ask me now what I was doing from 30 to 40, I have no idea at all. And it was only when I sort of turned maybe 40, 41, I started to realise that I hadn't met anyone yet who I could, you know, marry, have children with. So at age 42, I think, I started to think, well, maybe, you know, I've done everything else on my own. Maybe I'll try having a child on my own. And I actually was suffering from fibroids, and my NHS consultant, who I went to see about that, just happened to be one of the leading experts at the Oxford fertility unit. And when we talked about options for treatment, and I talked about not having kids yet, so wanting conservative treatment, he then mentioned how he was, you know, at the Oxford fertility unit, and that I should go along there and sort of think about doing things, you know, by myself really. So I did. I tried IUI and IVF, and then it reached the point where it didn't work. So this was maybe when I was about 44, I think. And the next step then for me was going to Barcelona and using donor eggs. And it's at that point that I called it a day, because the thought of doing that by myself, I just thought I couldn't handle it. It was bad enough trying to do it in Oxford, and I was lucky that I live in Oxford and the clinic is 15 minutes drive away from me. And you know, I managed to somehow juggle all of the treatments with quite a demanding job, but I couldn't manage it going abroad. Anything beyond that was just too much for me to handle, and that's when I called it a day. Or I don't think you ever really call it a day, but or maybe you do, it depends on individual circumstances for me. But I just thought, no, I can't do that next step, and the natural consequence of that, not doing that next step, was really putting an end to my hopes of having a child.
I mean, I think it's interesting about the calling it a day aspect of it, because that's something that a lot of us as women struggle with, especially when we're trying to explain our stories to non-childless people. Because, you know, I always get a sense of there shouldn't be an end point, because you should just keep going until the miracle happens. And to understand that miracle doesn't always happen. And also there's a different miracle that happens, and that's the miracle that we are here today, and being able to tell our stories in the way we tell them. One of the things that really struck me, or a few things that struck me in your story, is how much it parallels with mine. I mean, this is one of the things we were looking at, myself and Muriel, about seeing the difference between the women of colour's journey and other people's journeys, in terms of we wanted to see what the similarities were or the differences and come back together at the end and talk about it. And this thing you said that so resonate with me culturally, how our parents have kind of encouraged us to get educated, and we understand why. But that all then takes precedence in terms of actually meeting someone and having a family. But all of a sudden, so I remember hearing, you know, you get educated, you get a good job, then you'll meet someone, you get married, and then you have children, and it has to all be in that order, and then it will all work out. Nothing about when it doesn't work out. And just thinking along those lines, I wonder, what was the hardest part of your journey that you found really difficult to deal with? And there might be one or two or three or four things, but, you know, I just thought it'd be really good to get a sense of what you found hard about your journey.
Okay, sure. So I think probably the hardest thing was feeling alone in the journey, not having anyone to share it with. So trying to handle everything, you know, trying to handle everything from the emotional side of things to just the practicalities and the logistics of things. So, you know, not having, although I think I only told one close friend what I was doing, and, you know, she was great, and a real support, but not having a life partner, and feeling alone when I was doing it. I think that was the hardest thing for me.
I think, again, you know, that's something that even I've struggled to get people to understand. Even though I was with my husband on my journey, it was still lonely because you don't talk about it, you don't tell people about it. You know, it is such an isolating experience.
It is, I didn't tell anyone at work what I was doing. I just managed. And now when I look back at it, I think, how did I manage it? But there was just something that, you know, I was in that frame of mind where I just made it happen, and I just managed to somehow arrange my schedule, but not really thinking about the enormous amount of energy that it took for me to do that. I just did it, and now thinking about it, even the thought of it just makes me feel exhausted. But at the time, I just did it.
So given what you know about the impact of it all now, what kind of made you not talk about it at the time, or not tell anyone about what you were going through?
That's a really good question. It's a really good question. I think almost there was a little bit of, I would say, shame around it. Then I was just worried, what would people think of me, you know? So I was thinking, they probably see me as a little bit weird anyway, because I don't have a husband, and I'm on my own, and I don't have children. And then if they found out that I was trying to do it by myself, they'd probably think, oh my, you know, it was more about what would other people think of me, you know, like some sort of desperate woman, you know, that sort of stereotype of, you know, last ditch attempt and trying to have a kid, and you know, why didn't she do anything about it earlier? You know, why has she left it this long? And I guess.
See, the interesting thing is, I wonder, would you have felt the same shame around it if it did result in a baby?
No, I don't think so. No, I wouldn't. Well, no. I obviously I don't know, but I don't know. I did have those sorts of I did have sort of those thoughts, and, you know, because when you go for treatment, you do have the counselling, beforehand, and some of those questions around, well, what would you tell the child, and would come up, and then I would also think, well, what would I tell other people? So now, how would I explain this? You know, but I just thought to myself, well, it will all be worth it. So it doesn't really matter, because it would all be worth it. Yeah, I would handle that.
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing around it for me, and hence why I asked, was because your story in terms of wanting to have a baby and taking the decisions you made to try to make that happen is not unusual. Because how many, there are loads of women, loads of couples who have gone down the journey of assisted reproduction. The difference is I think when it ends in the baby, sometimes, I suppose in a way, and I don't want to be, I don't want to sound contradictory here, or sound like I'm criticising, but there's sometimes I get a feeling like it doesn't matter how you got there, because you got there. But when you're childless, all of a sudden, all of this matters. All of it, in a way, is a part of that adds to the shame in some respect. But then in another flip of the coin, because I didn't try IVF, so I found that I had to justify that to people. So it was almost like, because I didn't want to go down that road, I didn't want it enough, and I really had to battle with those feelings. Whereas someone who's done it, there was a sense of, well, at least you tried, but I still think that you didn't try enough, because you do 1 round or 2 rounds, but you could have done 3, 4 or 5. I still get a sense that you should still keep going until it ends, because you just gave up too soon. So I guess no matter which way you go, it's never enough for everyone else to get that you wanted it.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, because I stopped after 1 IUI and 1 IVF when I was told the chances of success would be like 2%, 1%, and that really, if I wanted to increase it to 50%, to go to donor eggs. So I perhaps, when I hear stories of other people doing like 9, 10, 11 rounds, you sort of think, oh, well, I only did 1. So I completely understand that. Yeah, absolutely.
I wonder with all of this, how much culturally, and you can describe your cultural background as you answer this, but how much culture and possibly religion played out in your journey and your grief or ability to grieve around childlessness?
Yeah, it's interesting, because I kind of buried all of that aspect, and so culturally, my background is that my parents are both Indian and Sikh religion, so they're Sikhs, and but actually I didn't even think of any of that whilst I was doing the treatments, and to be honest, I've not. But now when I think about it, I think, wow, I think that started even before the childlessness. I think my kind of distancing from it started maybe because I didn't go down the traditional route of getting married in my 20s. And already that's really unusual, that already would set me aside as, like a sort of, wow, that's a bit odd, a bit unheard of. Why, my mum would get all the questions, well, is she married yet? And because that's a time where they think you should start. I think getting an education now, getting a career is becoming more, acceptable. But not getting married even, it's just, you're seen as a bit of an oddity. So to be married, I think already I was distancing myself from that community, and because I thought, well, and then this, I just thought, well, I'm already probably seen as a bit odd. So to do this is, the child thing would just be the icing on the cake, really. But it's made me so sort of not want to attempt, I guess, to integrate myself into that community, because I wouldn't feel that I would fit.
Yeah.
There's sort of no place for me. If you're not part of, if you haven't got a family, it's really difficult to explain. And I can't even say, well, I have a husband and we tried and it didn't work out. Maybe you would get some sympathy. But to be single and unmarried is and not have children, I don't see a place for myself there. And I do wonder, are there other people like me, out there, that are in a similar situation to me? Yeah.
Is that as in Asian, single?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
How
do you think having a child, because culturally, I mean, I know other cultures or, non-women of colour have similar experiences, and I think family doesn't matter what culture you are, family is a huge thing. But talking to Black women and Asian women, I think there's just an added layer to it and an added importance around it, because some of what I'm hearing from you was about, you're odd because you didn't get married, and you're odd because you didn't have children. You're already odd because you were single. I know.
Yeah.
I had a lot of when you're going to get married and when you're going to get settled down, and I felt that that was because of being a Caribbean person. It just felt very culturally. It didn't feel like this is what everyone gets asked. And I also felt that not extending the family was a huge deal as well. Not being part of that was a huge deal. And I wonder how you feel that if you did have a baby, given that you said you'd already distanced yourself in a way already, being odd because you were single, do you think having a baby would have helped to bring that back, or bring some of that back in terms of how culturally or how your family would have seen you?
I think probably. I think it would bring me more into that sort of normal bracket of people. I wouldn't, if I'd have gone down the route of doing it myself and being successful, I wouldn't necessarily know how to explain the lack of a partner. But I think the fact that I had a child would probably make me a little bit more acceptable, maybe.
At least you had a child.
Yeah, exactly. That's it. That's precisely it. It was, make me seem more normal and less odd. Yeah. At least I had a child. Yeah.
Do you think people would have wondered how you had that child, being single, or would it just have been, at least you found someone to have a child with?
I think there would have been definitely quite a lot of questioning. I think, I suppose with any sort of South Asian community, they're not, sometimes you think, oh, perhaps Western sort of white English people may be nosy, but in the South Asian community, they're really not backwards in just coming out and asking the most personal questions. It's just seen as normal. It's just like they have a right to know everything about you. They've got a vested interest in this. So I think there would have been quite a lot of questioning. I think I still perhaps would have. I would have tried to avoid it probably. It would have been bad enough, but in a way, I do feel like I'm missing out on community. So there's a Gurdwara in Oxford, for example, and it would be nice to go and go along and feel part of the Sikh community. But I just think I would be too. I just couldn't face the questioning about my personal circumstances. So I'd rather not.
So you just touched base on something about community and going to community events that you feel that you not necessarily would be comfortable going now. So I wonder, how has your experience been impacted by the current culture of our times?
I think generally in culture, it's very focused on having children for women generally, and it's just everywhere. Programs about it, following people's pregnancy journeys, then programs about people being mums, and it's just constantly everywhere. So I think it's hard to find a place for yourself and to feel that but you're not less than others, and I think that's probably my main. That's kind of what I guess keeps me going as well. This thing that I'm not less than because I'm different, and in a way, and I've thought about this when I hear what other people say that aren't women of colour, when they talk about that feeling of being other and being different from other women. I've had that feeling my whole life because of the colour of my skin. And if you're walking down the street, people won't necessarily know that you don't have children. But I, as a woman of colour, could be walking down the street and just get abused simply because of the way that I look. And I've always felt on the outside, with groups of, at school, I've always had a slight awareness, quite a big awareness that I am a minority. And I think I take from that experience actually, and in a way I'm pleased that I have it, because it's really helped me then cope with the additional othering of not being a mother. I see it as a strength that I can cope, and I've got that resilience, and I know how to deal with it, and I can process some of those emotions because I've been doing it all of my life. So in a way, I feel that I'm quite lucky in that respect, that I've had that experience. I see it as almost like a sort of a strength that I've developed, and I take from that not being less than into this area of my life as well. So yeah, that's how.
So it sounds
I really see that.
Yeah, because it sounds like, given the experience you have as a woman of colour, anyway, you've then had an added layer of resilience, or you already had a layer of resilience coming into your childlessness journey. Actually really helped you to then be on the childless journey, or be at the end of it, in terms of making the decision not to go any further. That helped you then in your grieving process.
Yeah, it really has. It's because I've developed that strength and that resilience, and learning how to cope with being different, being a minority, and I've been able to use that in this additional this additional element of my life of, again, not fitting into the wider society because of not having children, but also I've learned to value myself and not internalize that, because I think that's when we start thinking that we're less than others because of our circumstances, that's the real problem. So I've been really working on that, looking into internalization of things like that, and making sure that I do things that I can see my own worth, and it brings me an added dimension, because I think it allows me to have that empathy with people that aren't don't fit into the wider mainstream sort of community, and yet still see their worth.
So in a way, being a woman of colour and your experiences has helped you on that journey.
It has.
Really interesting.
Definitely.
I certainly haven't thought of it from that point of view. I mean, I've questioned why being a woman of colour would mean I would grieve differently from anyone else. But I guess it isn't that we're grieving differently, it's that in a way how we process it, and in some respects how women of colour don't necessarily agree because of the cultural background where they're coming from. So if you've never been in a place where that was encouraged in terms of, you know, looking at it, like, I know religion wise, you know, a very Christian view would be to take it to God and pray about it and have faith. So therefore I won't feel like I'm in a position to ask for help, or won't want to ask for help, because I think I am already doing that by taking it to God. So it's really interesting to hear how you've used, in the fact you were saying you already knew you were different anyway, and you kind of separated from a lot of things, but it's interesting to see how you've taken the experience of being a woman of colour to help you on your journey. And I
definitely.
With that, what would you say then to other childless people based on what you know, or what you now know, and what you've learned from this?
I think it would be to not feel less than others, that they are valuable human beings just like everyone else, and that they have different experiences, and you know, it is difficult and it's hard, and it's not something that ever goes away. It will always be with you, but you can still have a fulfilling life, and you are of worth. So that self-worth, and that self-belief, and there is a path forward, and you can go on to have a really interesting, fulfilling life and make a valuable contribution to the world without children.
Which is, yeah, I mean, that's one of the things the message we're all getting out there to the world, or to the childless community, because having a fulfilling life and knowing that we matter is a huge part of this. It is a huge part. I think the fact that women in our situations don't feel like they matter means that they won't be able to see that they can have a fulfilling life. So I think it's a really important message, definitely, to get out there. And listening to your journey and your story, because it sounds like you have really reflected on where you were before, and how you've got here, and everything that's happened along the way. So I wonder how you would describe the person you are now compared to the person at the beginning of your journey.
Yeah, gosh, I remember talking to my good friend about how I was feeling. So this was sort of back in 2015, and I just had a really awful Christmas and New Year. Like, I've always really enjoyed New Year, because I always saw it as I was one of those kind of people that really loved the whole, oh yeah, new year, new start, you know, one of those types of people who just really loved it, and you know, would set different goals and intentions for the year, always quite optimistic. And I remember saying to my friend that that particular time, that I felt like when I looked at the future, it just seemed grey. I saw it as a grey colour, and I used to see it as pink. So if you said to me, "Oh, you know, what colour do you see the future?" I would see it as pink, sort of bright and optimistic. And I started to see it as grey. And then as I went through this journey, and you know, with Gateway Women and all the resources, and then connecting with others as well, and realising that I'm not alone, I have that life, and that I wasn't less than, and I was worthy. We're all worthy, and you can have that fulfilling life. Then I'm starting to see the future as pink again when I think of it in colours.
I do have that.
Yeah, the future's not orange, it's pink.
not sure what colour I would be, but I would be multicoloured. It'd be like, it's all
Yeah,
I
beginning to dream again, I guess.
and it's nice to see how you smile, when you describe the pink, it's so nice to see how you smile and light up. And, because the thing is, at the beginning of these journeys, we are not the same people. We're, in a sense, we're broken. And we don't know why we're confused. I mean, I certainly was confused by it all, because I was quite ambivalent about being a mum. And also I recognised doing my grief work that a lot of it was about it all being right, and that's a very cultural thing because of the messages I had growing up. So because I was in a place where I had done it all right, look, I'm married now, it should happen, and it didn't happen. It was just devastating and confusing. And I didn't know really what to do with those feelings. I mean, it was a lifeline meeting Jodie Day and finding Gateway Women, and I laugh as well, because I reflect back on even Jodie's reflections of my journey, and she was, I know I went in that room with all those women, and when I was doing the Plan B mentorship program, and I didn't want to tell anyone my story. I did not want to talk. I was so ashamed. I was so low. And it's like, now I'm doing well. I'm childless. I'm alive.
Love it. It's great.
So yeah, it's really great to hear about your pink.
Like we sometimes look to, and I know I was looking for, the kind of the Asian role models that I could look to, who might be in a similar position. And I thought, if they just don't exist, then maybe we need to tell our stories. And let other people know that they're not alone. So,
and important, I mean, you've really summed it up really nicely, is the fact, we do look for women like us, and this is what I hear a lot from other Black women and even Asian women who connect with me, because they're not seeing women that look like them on the platform. And you just said it as well, you looked for role models, and but the beautiful thing about what you just said is you became your own role model and became a role model for other women to follow behind you, because exactly that. I mean, I remember the first time I saw a Black woman talking about it, and I was like, oh! And I was literally, it's a Black woman talking about this.
Well, do you know, it's like going back to when we were kids and we'd see a Sikh person on TV. There's a Sikh, there'd just be like an extra in the background. Like a Sikh postman on EastEnders for years. There's a Sikh postman. He's got a turban, and it's like that.
Exactly. It really helps to break the shame and the taboos of actually talking. It's almost, because sometimes you feel like you're talking out against your culture, and actually we're not. We're actually embracing it to say, this is why it's difficult for us to be here, but actually it's okay for us to be here. Hence why I'm doing what I do, hence why I'm so keen to get, talk to other women of colour, to hear their stories too, because we need to be heard. They all need to be out there. It's brilliant that we're brave enough to tell it, knowing that the cultural baggage can actually have an impact on us too.
And it's brilliant what you're doing, because I feel like you're leading the way, and sort of, it takes one person to do it, and then other people think, oh yeah, I could tell my story as well. So,
that I must say, that is one of the beautiful things that I've experienced on my journey about it, because I can see women doing, I can tell my story too, and it's just an amazing thing to watch women unfold in that way and open up and shine. And they're, not everyone's going to be on the platform, not everyone's going to be, talking in the way we do, but just be able to own it for themselves and share it in their own circles is a huge thing. And and that is enough for them, because they are able to do it. And it's amazing that, and I'm glad you're part of my journey as well of doing it, because you're here with me today. So, again, it's such an honor. It's an honor to be able to do it and share it with other women such as yourself.
Yeah, it's great. Thank you.
So my last question, I would love to know what your Plan B means to you.
Oh gosh, yeah, wow. That's a really good question. The plan B for me has been both internal and external. So it was an internal shift, I think, in my perspective of what it means to be childless. So reframing what that meant, and from the negative that we see in society around us to actually a real positive. And when I was doing the Gateway Women work, that helped me along that journey. And then I started to, as a natural sort of consequence of seeing myself as, you know, that person. I am still a worthwhile person, and I can still dream and I can still hope for the future. I started to, things came back to me that I'd lost interest in doing, totally lost interest in doing. And one of the things I undertook some coaching myself, when I felt strong enough that I actually wanted, I could dream about the future again, and could dream, you know, of I could do this for a career, or I can do that, you know, that there is still life, even if you don't, you know, have children. That, and I'm going to explore those opportunities again, because I thought I just reached that kind of that grey. I was like, well, you know, nothing now. And once I started to be able to dream again, and had changed my perspective, I then I started to remember that I used to be, one of the things that I loved most about my work was coaching and mentoring my team. And I enrolled on a coaching and mentoring course, so a master's in coaching and mentoring, and I've just loved doing that. One of the things that I just love learning. That's something that really, so Jodie talks about finding things that fill your cup, and that was one of the things that filled my cup, learning. And you know, whereas before I was thinking, well, what's the point? You know, what's the point in sort of doing any of that? I just rediscovered my love for learning, and yeah, and I'm really enjoying doing that. So that's kind of what my plan B is, to yeah, just learn and do all the things that I used to love doing. And for some reason, when I was going, there was a grief, I guess, you lose interest in doing anything.
Yeah.
So rediscovering all of those joys, and yeah, learning to do what brings me joy.
I love that, and it's so simple. It's beautiful, because I think one of the things, and given that I co-facilitate Reignite weekend workshops, there's a lot of women coming through, and you know, they'll be on the community as well, that think plan B needs to be huge. And because you think it needs to be huge, you don't know where, basically it's like mind-blowing, you don't know where to start, and therefore how am I going to even get there? Apart from the fact that they're grieving so much they can't even think about a plan B. And to hear you talk about the shifting, the internal shifting, and then kind of, I suppose, redesigning what it all meant for you, and finding yourself within it, that sounds like such a beautiful healing part, that then you could go on to think, well, I love learning, and I can utilize that and do more. I just love the sound of all of that. And yeah, as I said, it just, I think for me it sounds so beautiful, and it's so wonderful to hear that as well from you. You know, I think so many women do. You know, my plan B started with me just wanting to find my voice, and I say just. But,
yeah, I know, it's amazing how we insert the word just for things, isn't it?
But having the, you know, I suppose that it's that recognition of something, to then look at what are those little things you can do to get there. And it, again, it doesn't have to be big. I started with having little play projects and singing, because I actually used to love to sing, and just singing again gave me so much joy. It put such a smile on my face, and I felt alive learning songs and singing them. It was just great. And I think hearing you describe that as well, it sounds like
yeah, exactly, rediscovering those.
yeah,
Yeah,
you know, it's
it's
like you claimed it all back.
yeah, exactly. And I before all this happened in my last decade, towards the end, I started doing my yoga teacher training, and I'd lost interest even in teaching yoga, and it's only through Gateway Women, and so I rediscovered my joy for lots of things, and I did it, you know, not in, it was all part of that reframing my perspective. So now it's a joy for me to be able to teach other women without children yoga, and yeah, so it's like I found it's helped me find like another purpose, like you feel like you don't have a purpose. That's what I felt, and I've rediscovered it. Yeah.
So fantastic. The hearing you say I said yes, I think is lovely. I'm reading Shonda Rhimes' The Year of Yes at the moment, and she's all about saying yes. She took a year. Well, basically, it was somebody said, you know, you never say yes to anything, and she decided, right, for the next year, I'm going to say yes to everything. And she was scared of doing it at first and didn't want to, and a lot of resistance. But saying yes puts you in a position to experience something new and to learn about yourself and to discover other things, and there's so much growth in that. And that's what I really hear from you, saying yes to being on the journey that you're on. And I'm so grateful you said yes to me to interview you as well, because it has been such a pleasure to have this conversation with you and just being part of my journey and opening up a new aspect of my world and allowing me to know a bit more about yours.
Oh, thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure. Really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Hi, I'm here with Sevilla Morgan from the United States. So I'm going to let Sevilla introduce herself because I always get this wrong. So Sevilla, welcome.
Thank you, Yvonne. So glad to be on with you. Thank you for the invitation. It's an honor. And I'm Sevilla Morgan. I am podcaster, general encourager of the Childless Not by Choice community. And I'm working on episode 112 this month, actually. So I'm just really happy to be here and to help contribute to the Childless Not by Choice community by being here with Yvonne. Thank you very much.
It's so great to have you as well. Now, I met Sevilla, I think it was last year, and I saw you had done an interview with a group of women, including Jodie Day, and Jodie actually had told me I need to get in contact with you. So I remember after the video, I then sent you an email. Yes. And thought, yes, and we started talking, and then you interviewed me on your show, which was such a privilege. So
that show has gotten a lot of listens, let me tell you. It really has.
It's so great. It's so great. It's always great to be able to get the message out, especially when it gets transatlantic. You know, it gets across the waters. So it was so great to do it, and I had such a great time, and it's been great because we've kept in contact ever since. So I'm so glad now I'm able to interview on my part of the interview circle that I'm doing with Meryl. So we'll see where this goes too. So what I wanted to start with was to ask you, what has been the hardest thing about your childless journey?
Well, I kind of wrote my answers down. I want to take a quick look because, so pardon the glasses, everybody. But that's what I did. I wanted to give myself a cue. It's still Mother's Day, believe it or not. So Mother's Day it's like a trigger. I feel fine pretty much through the year, and then Mother's Day comes around and it's like, oh, is it really Mother's Day again? Do we really have to do this again? Can't we make some changes in our society? So yes, the answer is Mother's Day.
Now that's something I've heard you talk about before. So I wonder, what do you do? And I know there's a lot of other women that Mother's Day is a trigger for as well, you know, quite naturally. Right. So I wonder what has helped you to be able to get through Mother's Day.
I think the best thing that really helped me was a woman that I interviewed a couple of years ago. She's now in her 70s. And when she was in her 30s, she had a hysterectomy. So she never got to have the children. And this is a church-going woman. She's a missionary. She's been all over the planet. She's done most of her mission work in India and, you know, Eastern, like in the Asias. And she actually works for Campus Crusade for Christ, for anyone who knows that organization. So this is a church lady, okay? And when I interviewed her, I remember her saying to me, Sevilla, you don't have to go to church if you don't want to. And it was like a light bulb moment for me, because all of this time I thought I had to go to church, not because I'm religious, because I don't believe in religion. I believe in relationship with God and with Christ, but I just felt like I had to be there. It never came to me that I don't really have to go. And so when she said that to me, the light bulb went off, and I set that boundary, which I've talked about boundaries quite a bit, of just not going. I can listen online. My church has an online program, or I could just go with, well, my mom is now gone, you know, but when she was alive, I went to her church with her. So ever since that time, I decided I don't have to go. I do like the fact that there are some churches that have made changes to include those of us who are childless, but I'm still not ready to go back yet.
It's really interesting how you said that you've given yourself permission not to go, because I know one of the hardest things, especially culturally, it's one of the things I've come across with women of colour, Black and Asian women, is that, especially when it comes to the family, that it's really hard to say no.
Right.
And I think church is another aspect where people do find it really hard to say no, and they feel like they have to be there.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things I found is that church people didn't allow me to actually grieve. So I wondered what impacted on your ability to grieve?
Well, I think I totally agree with you with the church people not allowing you to grieve. And sometimes I even wonder, because I have this gift of just over analyzing. And so I tend to wonder what people mean when they say something or don't say something, or, you know, if they're giving the silent treatment, or if just whatever it is people are thinking as women who have children and you don't have any, and they think that, well, I don't think that's a great excuse for you not to come to church, or for you not to, you know, be involved, or whatever it is, whether it's church or any other organization. But then they want to always be talking about their children, and they want to know why you couldn't try this or that to try to have children, or, you know, what's wrong with you. And so I still believe that boundaries are key, and we have to set proper boundaries. And so I think, I don't know if I'm answering the question, but I believe that boundaries help set the tone. So I don't know if that answered the question quite.
Well, I think from what I'm getting from it is that because people can ask really awkward questions, and they can say things that actually are very unhelpful, that in a way, I know from my own experience, it stopped me from actually being able to be open about my situation, let alone allowed to be sad about it. So I kind of understand the whole other people or us setting the boundaries around it, so that in a way it protects us from the silliness that we get, or the unhelpfulness that we get, so that we can grieve. Sometimes the grieving has to be taken away from those people just because it's unhelpful. But I think there has to be an element or a room or a place for us to be able to grieve. And I think from what I am understanding from your answer is that the boundaries helps us do that, because we're able to just pull ourselves away.
Yes, but I don't want it to sound like I'm using boundaries as a crutch either, because there's a difference between boundaries and crutches.
Mm-hmm.
And so, as we all know, but crutches are what help you during a time when you're hurt. Like if you broke your leg, you use crutches. And then when you're healed, you don't need the crutches anymore. Boundaries are a little bit more permanent, and they help you maintain your self-esteem, as well as making sure everybody understands that you're just as important as they are. Making sure moms understand that even as a non-mom, that you're just as important a person as they are.
No, I think that's really important as well. And it does go a long way to, I suppose, keeping us sane in this crazy time, in this crazy place.
Right.
And you know, I just like the whole element of actually we are just important too. We are just as important. Doesn't matter that we don't have children, but especially where pronatalism takes a big place. You know, mums are superwomen. Mums who have careers are just fantastic because you did it all, whereas we're just selfish, or we were career women, and you know, all the negative things. Yes,
right.
There's something wrong.
Right.
There's absolutely something wrong. So it's great to be able to actually put it in a way that says we still matter too. I wonder then, because religion, I know for yourself, religion does, or Christianity plays a big part in your life. And I wonder how your experience has been impacted by cultural aspects of your life.
Well, fortunately for me, I am a member of and have attended a multicultural church for the last 10 years. So you name it, every race, creed, and culture goes there, which helps because as a person of Caribbean descent, I was born in the Caribbean. I did attend my dad's church for the first 40 years of my life. And so, yes, it's a totally different church service. You know, it's a different outlook. Everybody seems to have children. At least you that's what you think when you're there, that everybody got to have the child, and it's a big family thing. And it's not that the multicultural church of thousands of people is not family, because we have our own way as a huge church of creating family, but you have less of a chance of choosing your family in a smaller, more culturally set church. So then you're close to the people, they know all of your business, and they more so want to know what's wrong with you, where at least in the larger church, and I'm not knocking the smaller church because it has its pluses, but in the larger church, you can commiserate with people of like, you know, background, or people who are open enough, even if they don't match your background, to understand what you're going through and dealing with. So then you end up being able to have all types of friends. So I have friends who are mothers and grandmothers, and then I have friends who don't have any children, and we all get it. We all have more of a feeling of understanding that we didn't all get everything we wanted out of life.
I mean, I find that quite interesting, because one of the things that I found difficult with, I suppose, both culturally and within the church was, no, I didn't do my grieving for childlessness while I was in church because I had already left, but I had experiences around that environment that stay with me even now. So I remember going back to other people asking, and older women asking of how they had gone through their childlessness, and how they worked through that, and what was their journey like, because at the time I was coming towards the end of that difficult period and where I could talk about it. And one of the things they said to me was, God knows best, it's God's will. And I heard a lot of things around don't give up hope, keep praying, almost like I didn't have enough faith, and that's why I was in this situation. So I wonder if you had any of those experiences and actually how you've worked through those.
Well, let me tell you that for me, you know how they have BC and before Christ and AD for after death? Well, for me, it was BH and PH. So before hysterectomy and post hysterectomy.
Okay.
And I'll tell you that I'm one of those people, at least I can tend to be. I will hang on and keep pursuing and pushing through, and not really realizing when to give up. And so before the hysterectomy, I had this hope, this continued hope, even as the fibroids kept coming back, and even after my third myomectomy, and just knowing somewhere deep down that it wasn't going to work out. There was no way that I was going to meet Mr. Right, get married, and have the kid before the fibroids completely took over my body. But even up until the time that I made the appointment for the hysterectomy, I was holding out hope. But then when the morning I went for the hysterectomy, I sat there and I was there with my parents and one of my sisters, and I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, and even maybe a couple of weeks before, did I make the right decision? Am I doing the right thing? And I had to convince myself that this was the right decision. This was what made the most sense. And if God had wanted to heal me, he had many years to do so. And it didn't happen. If he wanted me to meet so-called Mr. Right, he had many years for this guy to show up. But it didn't happen that way. So as I sat there the morning of the surgery, I had to reconvince myself that this is it. This is it. It's the right decision. Don't second guess yourself. You were having accidents every month like a little girl having her period for the first time. So, I mean, I hate to be to be blunt, but it is what it is.
It is. And it's an experience I've had too. So I completely understand, you know, what you're saying.
So after the hysterectomy, I think that's when I started realizing that, okay, I'm going to have to deal with this in a different way. I'm going to have to figure out what to do with the hope that I had and not become bitter and embittered. And so it was definitely, that was the defining moment for me, where I crossed over from hope to dealing with what it would become, what my life would become. And I had a choice. I could either, like I said, be bitter, or I can push through and do the best with what I now had.
Yeah.
Post-hysterectomy.
Yeah, so one of the interesting things you were talking about there was hope. And what I found is that people tried to keep me in hope, i.e. in denial, because it was almost like they wouldn't allow me to grieve, especially because you can do something about it, and praying and having faith and believing in God was something you could do, which I think you made an important point, where actually if God wanted it to happen, he would have let it happen or made it happen. So, I mean, I have many thoughts around that anyway. And I just wonder, given all of this, what would you say to other childless people based on what you now know?
Well, I think that we have to be, even as we're not a collective, let me start there. Even though we belong to the same quote unquote demographic of being childless, whether it's childless not by choice or childless by choice, or whatever we're all a part of this demographic where we don't have children. And we are still, though, on individual journeys. And we have to know where our journey and when it ends, where it is and when it ends, where we are on the journey and when it ends, I should say. So just because I know of a woman who waited or tried 20 years before she had a child. And so I'm not going to tell anybody when to stop or to keep going or not to give up hope or whatever they call it. Whatever it is for your journey, that's it for your journey. But make sure that the decisions you make, if you're going through IVF for the 10th time, that it's not because of what society is saying and what your mom says because she wants grandchildren, or even what your spouse is saying. If it's your spouse that wants you to keep trying and you're done, then it's time to have that conversation. And vice versa. If your spouse wants you to be done at try number 5 and you're on try number 8 and your life savings are gone, I mean, that person has say so as well.
Yeah.
And so we have to know when to say the end, and nobody can tell us that, or to keep going, and nobody can tell us that. We have to come to that decision on our own.
Yeah, I think that's a very valid point. Again, I have lots of thoughts around this, and it's way too much for this one interview because I'd go on forever otherwise. But I think it's the important thing is actually making the right decisions for you. And I remember somebody that I knew that had gone through 3 rounds of IVF, including donor eggs, and I think it was over a 15-year span. And she said to me, Yvonne, there's a time when you have to say stop.
Yes.
And that is part of the journey. I think that's an important part of the journey, because you could go on forever, whatever forever means. But
Right.
yes, you can keep going on, and it's painful to stay on that journey. And sometimes just to look after yourself, you do need to say no.
Right. And move on with life.
And move on,
Like you guys say
exactly.
over there. You guys
Yeah,
say get
move
on with
on.
it.
Even though I don't like that term anymore, because I think it's like, you know, you're done with that now, forget about it, let's just move on. When actually, no,
Right.
it's an important part. I think acknowledging
It's
the
a part of
grief
you.
is an important part. Acknowledging that journey is an important part. And I think it's about embracing it and honoring it, and then doing something with it. And I
Right.
think it's very different from moving on.
Move on. Yes, you're absolutely right. Move on doesn't mean forget about it at all. You
Yeah.
can't forget about a portion of your body or
Yeah.
your soul, or you're a whole person. And
Yeah.
that's a part of you. It's a tapestry. I like to see people and culture as a tapestry. So I like to see how everybody looks like what they're made up of, the pieces that they're made up of.
Mm.
So, you know, it's a piece of you. You can't let
Yeah.
go of a piece of you.
Absolutely. I know one of the things that I did when I did the Plan B mentorship program at Jodie is that we said a saying goodbye ceremony, and we wrote letters to our unborn children, and we read them out, and we burnt them in a park. And it was such a beautiful part, a beautiful ceremony, and a beautiful part of our experience, that it allowed us to honor why we were grieving. And it allowed us to, in a way, use it to then go forward. And, you know, I think it's important to do. Yeah, very important to do. So I think with all of this, I wonder how you would describe the person you are now compared to the person at the beginning of your journey.
I go back to that pre and post hysterectomy person again, because before, like I said, before the hysterectomy, I had so much, I just kept hoping.
Yeah.
Sometimes my hope would, you know, ebb and flow like the ocean's waves. You know, so it would be coming and going, and some days I'd be like, yes, I'm gonna get rid of these fibroids, and they're not gonna come back, and, you know, get rid of them long enough for me to meet Mr. Right or whatever. And then there are times when I'm like, oh, forget about it. There's no Mr. Right. What am I kidding myself?
No.
So, you know, it was just going back and forth. But after the hysterectomy, then that was it. You can't carry a child without a womb. So it's pretty much, okay, now I have to have hope in something else. And so I decided to have hope in something else.
Yeah. So, you know, that hope in something else, I mean, a lot of people struggle with the term Plan B. And something I read recently was the alternative Plan A. So I wonder what your Plan B or alternative Plan A or hope in something else now looks like.
Well, maybe I'm one of those alternative Plan A people, because I feel like once the hysterectomy happened, or in somebody else's case, once they decided to stop the IVF, or once they decided to just stop and start a new life and a new direction and a new journey, not what they expected or thought life would be, that's when I decided that I wanted to live a joyful and relevant life. And I have a right to feel relevant and to be relevant. I have, as one of our friends in the community says, I have a right to have a seat at the table.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to just concentrate now on making sure that there is a seat at the table for childless, not by choice women all over the planet. And so there are many of us in the space now running our own platforms, and we're global now, but we all know pretty much who each other is, and we are helping each other as much as we can. And so that's where I am now. I want to not only help the other women on their platforms, but I also want to help that woman who feels like she's an island by herself. Nobody understands what she's going through and what she's dealing with and where she is. And that's now my plan AB. BA.
Yes.
But
All the
that's
letters,
my,
we can put loads.
right, I mean, I now want to make sure, and that probably comes from the part of me that I tend to be an encourager. I
Yeah.
encourage people, and so I want that woman now to feel like she matters. And a woman just joined my group, and she's like, I'm not where you are yet, and
Mm,
I'm still grieving, and I'm hearing your podcast, but it sounds like you've already arrived. And I'm thinking, not 100%. No, I'm not back where you are, but you're okay where you are, and you are facing the facts that you're not where you'd like to be, which is a
mm,
first step. So she's already committed to do some things on the platform, because I have to remember that not everybody's in the same place on the journey that I am, or you are, or Jody Day is. And so I'm now thinking of some things. She's made me think again and made me realize, wait, we're in different places on our journey.
mm.
So it's a plan ABBA for me.
I like. I just love your expression of having a seat at the table. It's something I've heard actually other women say. And I think it's so important for women to know that we all have a seat at the table. And I, for one, I'm grateful that I've been able to sit at your table and have a conversation, and also invite other women to sit at the table too. I know we've talked about this before, about the Black experience, and I know it's very different from the UK and the USA. But one of the things that I'm very grateful for myself as a Black woman, is actually opening the door for other Black women to talk.
Yes.
Because so many Black women are there saying, thank you, me too. And especially as Black women are not going to other white women to talk. And we have similar experiences. We know this, we've heard it ourselves. But I think when it comes to a culture aspect and the way we were brought up and things we heard as a child, that other Black women don't feel like they can talk to, and they don't want to go to white women to have the conversations because they think white people are not going to understand. So I'm so grateful that we both can actually open the doors and offer different seats at the table for those women too.
I am too.
So Sevilla, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been such a pleasure, as always, to talk to you.
Thanks for inviting me.
And I wish you all the best on your ABBA, BAAAA
Whatever
journey.
it is. Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor.
Oh, thank you. You're welcome. So I'm here with the lovely Krista Cooper, who we were just chatting before I started recording, and I'm trying to remember how we met. And I think it was last year. Was it last year or the year before?
It was last year.
So how did we meet?
So I was one night in Michigan, where I live. I was had just finished Alexander McCall Smith's latest book, and I was wondering when he was coming out with his next one. And so I went on this hunt at like 1 a.m. in the morning on Google to see when his next book was coming out. And through a series of clicks, I ended up on some BBC page, and at the very bottom, there was a link to something called Women's Hour. And being the women's health researcher that I am, I was like, what is this? And so I clicked on it, and up pops this page with this podcast. And I start scrolling through the different weeks and, whatever. And then I see that there's this, the week that you had interviewed about, childlessness and reproductive health. And I was like, oh, wait a minute, and so I listened to the whole podcast, and I'm thinking to myself, this is a Caribbean woman. And we usually don't talk about stuff like that. So at that moment, I felt like maybe I should reach out to you. And so then I, do some research on Jody Day, and, I see you. And so then I made my choice. Yes, I'm going to email you, which I did. And then you responded. However, it didn't even occur to me at the time that I emailed you. I was like, wait a minute, I'm going to be in the UK this summer. I wonder if she wants to meet up. And so I think that's when I emailed you back and said, by the way, what do you think about meeting up? Yeah. And so there it began.
Yeah, I thought that was such the coolest thing. I mean, you do a something, you know. BBC Radio 4 was huge and a huge platform for me, but I never imagined women watching it and then contacting me, and you're one of other women that have contacted me as a result of that. So, you know, it did amaze me. I felt a little bit famous. That was nice. But I remember the emails that went back and forth, because I remember you saying, let's meet up, and, you know, I was like, yeah, let's do it. I thought I was really excited. And then we met up in London, and it was so fantastic. We had that wonderful day out, and we went to eat in I think it was a Japanese restaurant.
It was like Vietnamese. It was in Soho. It was
That's
great.
it.
Yeah,
so fabulous, so fabulous.
Yeah.
So, Krista, I thought, you know, as I said, we're doing this interview. I'm doing an interview circle with Meryl Rose from Gateway, and we thought it'd be really interesting to start with ourselves having an interview, but then go off and interview other women. So, for me, I'm looking at the Women of Colour's experience of childlessness and our fertility journeys. So I thought you'd be a great person to talk to, because we've had many conversations around this. So I thought it'd be great if you could just start by introducing yourself and just kind of giving us a brief insight into who you are and where you are, or how you started with your fertility journey.
Right. So as you say, I am Krista Cooper, Dr. Krista Cooper. So I am a professor of social work at a small liberal arts university in Michigan in the United States. And my research platform has to do with women's reproductive health. So mainly surrounding reproductive traumas and story work. So that is pretty much my research agenda. Started off doing research with Afro-Caribbean immigrant women living with HIV. And I did qualitative research, which focused on their narrative stories of their journeys living with HIV. And through personal experience, I became interested in women's experiences of reproductive health and their own journeys. And so I then shifted my research agenda to focus on women living with symptomatic uterine fibroids, because that's what I had. And going through my own journey, you know, I was very quiet about it, you know, for a number of years. But then I realized, as I started talking to other women, they were saying things. And I was like, well, wait a minute, hold on. So then that means that, you know, there are other women who are going through the same thing, but we're not talking to each other. So that's when I decided to research fibroids and got a grant to do it. But aside from academia, I mean, I'm a first generation Afro-Caribbean woman. My parents came to the US back in the 60s and indoctrinated me in all things Caribbean, all things Jamaican, more specifically. I grew up in an area dense with other Caribbean people, so the culture was very readily available. And then spent time in Jamaica, a lot of time in Jamaica as well, growing up from my formative all the way into my early adult years. So I feel like I got the best of both worlds, both African American as well as Afro-Caribbean culture. And generally speaking, I'm an introvert. I, you know, love good books and British detective shows, and a woman who has gone through her own reproductive journey as well. So that's me.
So one of the things, I mean, there's so many parallels in our stories. And I remember when we first spoke, because one of the early conversations we had was around fibroids. Yes. And I have fibroids. So I remember we had a big conversation around it, and a lot of the things that actually impacted on us, you know, and why we're here, really, as childless women. And it is one of the things that we have found on our journeys that actually have affected our abilities to get pregnant, but also the difficulties we've had on this journey. One of the things you mentioned earlier on was that you found that women don't talk, and it's definitely something I've come across
Absolutely.
Especially because I am talking and women are going, what? Hang on a minute. Somebody does talk about this stuff. So I wonder for yourself, and being someone who is now, as you mentioned, doing a lot of research around it and talking to women, how have you found opening up and talking as a Black woman in the Black community? How have you found that has helped you?
So the thing is most of the time we correspond with people who are like us, right? Unless you're in a setting where you're one of the few black persons, which can certainly happen. So initially, aside from the research, just as a woman living with fibroids, you know, I was mostly corresponding with women like myself, not necessarily Caribbean, however, but, you know, Black women. And my experience with that was the conversation is opened up. Start kind of talking about yourself. Women start talking, you know, even the ones who kind of hang back, which I've encountered a lot of those, but they're listening, definitely, you know, and then as they feel comfortable, they'll start, you know, joining in, etc. I have faced some resistance, you know. Sometimes I get women with those horrified glazed looks where it's like, are you talking about that? You know, that type of thing. But more often than not, it's been women, whether cautiously or just like, oh my gosh, somebody's talking about that, you know, I'm going to talk to you, that type of thing. So in both research and in you know, just in my everyday life, that's been my experience of women talking about it.
How would you say then that has helped? Because I know when I've spoken, and I had a very similar experience too, people are like, oh my God, someone's talking.
Yeah.
And I've always been amazed at that, because I don't know, I suppose because I'm a vocal person, I am an introvert myself, which surprises people.
Yeah,
but I think I've always come from the place where actually, or I found through my experience, that talking has really helped me to heal, because I have found answers. I have found, you know, I've questioned and I've heard different things that's really helped me to think about the experiences and the journey that I'm on. So I always found that it gave other women permission to talk, which I found a really interesting thing too, especially when you see the release they have in being able to open up. So I wonder how you have found, what your experiences around this, how you have found it has helped you being able to do that.
You know, gosh, it's still, it's a unique position for me. So I'm going to talk in two roles that I occupy. One as obviously myself, but then also as an educator and a researcher. So when I was in grad school working on my PhD, you're taught, well, you know, you're the researcher, you know, you're the expert, you know, in the area. And, you know, these are sort of the parameters or the boundaries, you know, when you are researching, you're not a counselor. So, you know, in social work, we do, at least here in the US, I think it's slightly different in the UK, is that we can be independent practitioners, meaning that we can do therapy like psychologists and things like that. So, you know, depending on your experience, you can start to kind of want to occupy that role when you're, you know, but it's like, nope, that's not your job. You're a researcher, and, you know, you're sort of removed in a way from the subject, you know, and there's all this language kind of thing. But with qualitative research, which focuses a lot on story and lived experience, I gravitated to it very naturally. And of course, because I'm that type of person, I journal all the time. I'm totally into story. I'm listening all the time to what people are saying, etc. So for me, initially, when I decided to do this research, I thought I was a bit mad. Like, I was like, oh, okay, you know, I mean, whoa, have you even dealt with your stuff? And like, you're asking people to, you know. So part of my experience was that when I started interviewing, I think it was like 2 women for my study, I remember feeling very exhausted I mean, literally, like I had to go and take a nap, like after I had finished, and I was eating stuff, and I was like, what the heck is going on? You know? And so I mentioned it to a colleague, and she said to me, you're doing work as well. As you're talking to these women, you're giving them the space to be able to talk about their journeys, but you're also involved, you know, in the journey. So I remember at one point I was trying to analyze some of the data, and I came on this block. I couldn't analyze anything. I couldn't do anything. And I thought, okay, this is strange. So I started like kind of really praying about it. And I'm like, okay, so what's happening with me? And then I realized, I was like, you need to work on your stuff too. So a friend of mine had just gotten back from Asia, and she was talking to me. And I don't know how the conversation started, but ultimately she ended up interviewing me. Right. So I gave her the protocol, I gave her everything, and she interviewed me. And so in talking through my story with her and my journey, I started realizing certain things about myself as well. And then when I went back to the data, I was able to actually engage with their stories. So it taught me something that a lot of times, you know, when we're bound by convention or our jobs or parameters, sometimes it can get in the way. And so, but it also, I think, brought me back to myself, which I was really grateful for, because then I can now engage with women in a completely different way. Probably about 4 or 5 months after that experience, one of the participants emailed me a journal article about a woman who at the University of Michigan who was researching, I believe it was, I don't want to misspeak, but I believe it was infertility or something like that with Black women.
Right.
And she said, I thought you would find this article really interesting. Well, I open up the article and I start reading, and I literally freeze, because she's talking about how exhausting it was, how she would have to take breaks after she was, and I was like, I'm normal. Oh my gosh, it's amazing, you know? But it really, she was very transparent about the process. And even though she, at least from the article, didn't state that she had, you know, was dealing with infertility, and I actually phoned her and we talked as well. And she said, no, I haven't had that journey, but I've worked with women who had, you know, and we know about the disparities with Black women with healthcare, with, you know, reproductive history, like all of that kind of thing. And so I just started realizing that, wow, the best research is really going to bring you back to yourself, you know, that type of thing. So for me, I feel like my journey personally, before I became a PhD or whatever, you know, that type of thing. But my reproductive journey, it's actually the thing, I think sometimes in your area of woundedness happens to be the area that you get the greatest liberation to, when you start to really delve and build community and really engage, you know, in people's stories. So that was a big shock for me. It was sort of like, wow, okay, you know. And so, yeah, so as a researcher, that was my experience. But then as a woman of color, dealing with my own reproductive trajectory, as I mentioned before, I'm Caribbean background, and we like to keep a lot of things secret.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, I'm going down the street, shh, don't tell anybody. I'm like, that's a secret though. So there's a lot of secrecy, I think, about, and there's a lot of stigma, especially surrounding reproductive health. I recently asked my mom, I remember talking to her about my research, and I said, I'm kind of curious, like, why didn't you ever talk to me about sex or about, you know, anything? And she's like, oh, ha, 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 ha. And she started kind of, you know, that nervous girl giggle.
Yeah.
And, you know, my mom is like in her 60s. And she was just like, well, we just don't talk about it. And I was like, okay. So, you know, there's that mentality where it's sort of like, it's taboo, you don't talk about it. We trust that you'll figure it out.
It's so interesting. I mean, I'm a Caribbean background as well, and I've had conversations with my parents, my dad in particular, about why don't you talk? And it's so interesting hearing what you're saying from the point of view that, yeah, we grew up hearing you don't talk about your problems. You know, I had a lot of don't bring shame on the family, what will the neighbours think? And being first generation British, and looking back on all my experiences and having the conversations with my dad, I realised how much they were trying to protect us, because they've come to England, like your parents would have gone to America, amongst a lot of white people. And all of a sudden, it was like they closed ranks and wanted to protect us from it. But within doing that, we were disempowered. Yeah. And I think generationally, there was always this mentality about you don't talk about your problems, because when we look at generational trauma, that is something I have definitely discovered in my research and in what I now talk about when I'm on my platform, is that actually from way back, slavery time, we couldn't talk. So that memory, that genetic memory is there, and it exists and it continues. Yeah. But in the absence of talking, we never break the silence. And there's something you were saying in your research and in what you found from talking, is that there's a lot of learning and a lot of healing in that process. So I wonder, within that, what was the difficulty you found in that journey that you felt that you had to push past or overcome to be able to be okay in the position that you're in and doing what you're doing?
I think the messaging, the early messaging, and I didn't realize how much it had infiltrated me about being silent, about not putting your business out on the street, you know, what are people going to think, you know, that type of thing. And then I'm in a leadership position, so it's even more, you know what I mean? So I started to realize how much it had really infiltrated my thinking, and especially about something like this. It was like, you know, so, you know, I think I had to really push past that and really push past, you know, if I write an article, which I will obviously, about the research, but if I write a journal article and I have to reveal things about myself, intimate details about myself, there are going to be people that are going to be reading this, and they're like, you know, and you go to conferences, oh, you're the woman who wrote that article about, you know, whatever. And I've had to get to the point where I'm like, do I care? In other words, if this is such a phenomenon, which it is, I mean, when I listen to the research participants and their narratives and their stories, I mean, there's so much suffering, and there's so much, you know, so that's what I mean. It's like, do I really care when a woman is reading it and they're like, oh, you too? Like you have that, you know what I mean? So that's the point that I'm getting to right now, where if I can take off some of the shame, take off some of the stigma, take off some of those cultural narratives about what it's going to mean and how people are going to perceive me, and walk in my own truth and be like, this is my experience. You've had yours. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. It was one of secrecy and silence. And I'm sure that, you know, they did it for their own reasons, but this is me. This is my journey. This is my story. And so if I choose to do that, which I will, then, you know, hey, if it's going to help another woman or women, then why not? I think it'll be absolutely worth it.
It's so, I mean, again, I am resonating with so much of what you're saying, because I remember when I had the idea of writing a book, which felt like such a crippling experience at the time, because I just thought, what am I doing? And I knew I had to tell my truth, but my truth was riddled with so much shame. Yeah. And as a Black woman, coming from everything we've said about, you know, we just don't talk about our problems, it was really difficult for me to reconcile that experience of shame and what it meant. And actually it was hidden. So prior to me having to deal with it, it was okay in a sense. It wasn't okay because we were feeling it, but it was okay because no one knew. So that was in the dark. But then all of a sudden it was going to come to the light. And there was a big thing around what will other people think, especially my family. And it was all about, I suppose in a way, in just thinking about what you said, it wasn't about what would white people think about me. It was about what would my community think about me, because I felt that it was about, I suppose, being strong and not being vulnerable, and not actually having those secrets that other people shouldn't know about. So it's really interesting.
The protection. I
yes.
think like
yeah. And again, it goes back to the don't bring shame on the family, because
exactly,
you know, my shame is my parents' shame. It's like, you know, and your parents do this thing, well, I never brought you up to be like that. So if we went and did it, clearly they did something wrong, which actually isn't true, but that's what we're carrying.
Yeah.
So it's so, you know, it's so interesting to reflect back on it. And I remember going back to my dad and asking him, you know, why didn't you talk about stuff? Because, you know, our parents have been through a lot. They grew up in the Caribbean, to come to now a different country, a different culture, and try and maintain yourself but be accepted, when actually I know for England they weren't. My parents had a lot of racism when they came here. That, you know, you kind of wonder, why didn't they tell us anything, and why didn't they speak? And my dad was just like, well, you just got on with it. And it really showed how much they carried with them, to be sitting there going, well, what's the point in talking? You just, you know, because I think in their eyes it was like, there is no point in talking because no one wants to hear it anyway. And then, you know, I would reflect on that and thinking of white people as well, because, you know, again, generationally, when we think of the genetic memory and the trauma that we've gone through, white people weren't listening to us. They didn't want to hear us. They didn't care. And I say that very loosely from the historic point of view.
Right.
And we never had the avenue to talk and heal from that process. So we're here now, still carrying that and still feeling like white people don't want to hear and listen to our problems, and they don't want to offer that help.
But, you know, I'm listening to you and I'm thinking to myself, in the UK, it sounds like it was a context where it's like, okay, you're Caribbean immigrant, you come, there's all these white people, whatever. But I'm reflecting on my experience as you're talking, and I grew up in a neighborhood that was predominantly Afro-Caribbean.
Right.
So we're surrounded by people who are like us, you know. I mean, even now, I can go to either end of this long avenue we have, and there are Caribbean bakeries. You can get everything. You can get your spices and your you know, your brown stew chicken and your escovitch and, you know, all this kind of stuff. So, I mean, I grew up with that. So for me, it's funny because I'm like, even amongst quote unquote your own people, it's still there. It's still like, you know, oh no, you know, you don't talk about that. You know, and so I feel like even though you're talking about it from that perspective, which is amazing and completely valid, it's just more like, and here I was with all these people, and it still was the same thing.
So it's an interesting thing, isn't it? Because I'm looking at it from, you know, white people didn't want to hear us, and you're saying actually you had the same experience. So it's really, really interesting, and you wonder what really is going on. So
I think it just speaks to how deep it's ingrained.
Yeah, it does. That does say a lot. I think it's such a powerful truth, for sure. So with all of this experience and all the things that you certainly encountered and what we've been reflecting on, what would you say to other childless people based on what you know?
You know, the thing about it is that I was looking over the questions for, you know, for today, and, you know, talked about being childless and even meeting you. I just want to say this, even meeting you, I think has increased the quality of my life. So, you know, when you know that you're not the only one, or even though you may know that, you know, in your head, it's not quite the same as relationally, right? So, someone said that to me recently about me, you know, she said, oh, meeting you. And I thought, oh, what, you know, it was like, what are you talking about? But then when I actually stopped and thought about it in the context that we were talking, because I haven't told you this, but I've recently started my own business for women
Wow.
with reproductive issues. So, so we'll talk more afterwards.
Yes.
But, we were in a meeting, and I went to a business conference a couple months back. And again, it was for the business, and I had been doing everything kind of undercover, and it was really quiet. And there's my West Indian, whatever. So it was really, quiet, and I was doing things behind the scenes and, having flip outs, every other day. Cause it was like, what are you doing? Why are you doing? Like, it's crazy. Like, who's going to want to talk to you? And, and so it was just this constant back and forth. And so there was a small business conference, and I went to it, and this woman was in a session with me about marketing. And she offered me her seat because it was standing room only. And I said, no, where are you going to sit? Well, comes to find out, she was co-facilitating that particular session. So she says to me afterwards, come to a meeting at 4, you should come. So I went in, and we all had to go around and talk about our businesses. And, I'm sort of taking deep breaths because this is the first time I'm talking about it publicly and, whatever else. Anyway, after we finished, I'm walking down the hall to the restroom, and I have to pass her, and she's talking to somebody, and she reached out and she grabbed my hand, and she said, "Don't leave." And I said, "No, I'm just going to the restroom." And she says, "Okay." So I get back, and she finishes up her conversation. And I kind of want you to picture it. So we're in this hallway, and there's people, masses of people just walking by, and we're just there. And she says to me, "When I met you this morning, I didn't realize that that's what you did." And I thought, oh, okay, and so she says, and she takes a deep breath, and she says, "I didn't know that that's what you did." And her eyes start tearing, and she starts telling me her story right there in this crowded hallway with these people. And I'm sitting there half stunned and half just in awe of like, wow, look at this woman. She's telling me her story, somebody that she just met this morning. But because she heard that I was, I had a company, and this business is specifically for women with reproductive issues, she starts, so in that moment, she felt like somebody gets me, at least somebody, I don't even know you, but maybe you'll understand better because you've started this business for a reason, and it has everything to do with what I'm going through. So I think for other women who are, childless, whether it's by circumstance or whatever, it's just, I think always walking in your truth, not what somebody else wants for you, not what you think you should want. It's where am I right now, and how do I make sense of this? And for each of us, that's going to be different, and nobody has the right to tell you that what you're doing is wrong. You know what I'm saying? Like it's literally a journey. It's literally your heart space, your mind space, your spirit space. It's a holistic kind of journey. And I think at the right times, in the right places, in the right spaces, God sends us those connections where it's like you meet another woman and you're like, wow, or you pick up a book and you read something and you're like, wow, or so it's all coming together, I think, to help us to be able to make sense of what it is that we're going through, to sort through our emotions. And it's not a quick job. It's not a done and dusted. It's a, you could be somewhere. I remember a friend invited me when I first found out that apparently they were saying that I was going through early menopause or whatever. And she invited me to her kid's birthday party. And I went, and I remember feeling so miserable. And I told her, I said, I have to leave. I'm sorry. I love you. I love her. But right now I'm raw. And I don't even know what to make of this, because I had just found out. And it was like, well, what does this even mean? And like, after I go through fibroids, and now I'm going through this, and so I think it's really just taking your time, knowing that different parts will integrate at different times, and things that don't even seem to be connected will somehow be connected. And it's just a journey, and there's no easy answers and no shortcuts. But I think that we are better for it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm so touched by all of that. I've got tears in my eyes just listening to what you've been saying. It isn't an easy journey. It really isn't,
Yeah.
And I think all of us out there know that. And there is a lot to be said about having compassion for yourself and being gentle on yourself while you go through it. And as you said, I think the openness of the situation really does help. As you say, I have similar experiences too, with women coming up to me and telling me their stories, and I feel so honored that they're trusting me with these stories. But I recognize it's, like I said before, the permission they now have to let go, which is such a beautiful thing to witness and to experience. It really is. Now, I'm very conscious of the time now as well. It's just flown by. I just can't believe 30 minutes has gone by this quickly. And when I first looked at the clock, there was 7 minutes, and I was thinking, how am I going to keep this going? And now it's 30 minutes. And I'm like, I've got so much more to ask. What I do, I think, just to end this, which I don't really want to at all, but I think one of the last things I think I want to just find out from you is just wanting to know who you are now compared to who you are at the start of this journey, and what your plan B looks like, because you did touch on this a little bit, but it'd be really good to just hear that final bit from you.
Gosh, who am I now? It's probably going to sound really cliche, but I'm still becoming. So I'm in process. But I do believe that I am much stronger. I do believe that it's shown me that I have a voice, and my voice is valid, and I don't have to minimize myself for anybody else. I don't have to re-script myself, because my narrative is my narrative, and lest anybody think that, every day I wake up and I'm like, I'm blah, 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 some days are better than others. But I think that once you start, at least for me, once I started on this journey, there's a point at which you realize I can't go back. And that's not anything necessarily to do with not having children. It's more about the truth that you learn along the way. And it starts shaping you in a way where you could go back. But after a while, you're like, I can't. I've got too much. I can't. You know what I'm saying? So I think for me, that's been the biggest thing in my becoming, is like understanding more about who I am, who I'm not, what I want, what I don't want. And honestly, if I could say anything, the biggest part of this whole journey has been doing away with the narratives that defined me for so long, whether they be cultural, societal, even spiritual. I feel like even in my spiritual life, I'm learning God in a completely different way. And it's like, I feel like he's saying to me, I'm not who you thought I was. Come, let me teach you, exactly, and for me, that's just been amazing. It's like, wow, okay. Yeah. But again, it's about the re-scripting. It literally is about the re-scripting. So I'm being re-scripted. That's it.
I just love how you said that you're being re-scripted. One of the difficulties I've had is around religion, and how the perception of it's how it's supposed to be. And I'm so curious about how you define the re-scripting, and how you've reframed what religion or spirituality means for you. Again, I just could you just give me a little insight into that? because that's something I know is a whole nother interview, a whole nother conversation in
say,
itself.
we need like a whole group.
I know, I have no time. But, you know, just give me a little taster so I can go away with a bit more.
So basically for me, gosh, where do I begin? Okay, so basically for me, I think the rescripting has been, I will say this, if I had not gone through everything I went through, fibroid surgeries, we think you have cancer, there's just so much, you know. I don't think that I would have been in this place with God. I mean, it came to a point where with the fibroids, because, you know, I grew up was like, oh, I'm going to get married at 26. I'm going to have my first baby at 28, the second at 30. And then somebody's getting snipped. And then, you know, I'm going to be like, you know, by the time I'm 45, my kids will be this age. You know, I had it all planned out. I'm like, I'm 40. But I think that, you know, my spiritual life has always been a thing that has helped me through lots of trauma and adversity. And, you know, between getting the PhD and being stripped, because that's its own stripping process. And then on top of that, having something that's so personal and so close to you happen, it was like, okay, God, I'm through. Like, let's just not even talk. I'm not even going to pretend like we're friends, because we're not. Like, you know, I feel betrayed by you. I feel betrayed by you. I feel like, you know, I've told you all my life this is something that I've wanted, and now for whatever reason, you're denying me this, and it hurts, and I feel betrayed. And so I remember having my first surgery, and it was the day before I was having the surgery. And I saw this thing pop up in my inbox, and it was a book by a woman. I can't remember her name, but the book is called Every Bitter Thing is Sweet. And I thought, well, that's an interesting name for a book. And so I clicked on it, because being the book geek that I am, and they had the first couple chapters free. So I was reading it. Well, lo and behold, she's talking about her journey with infertility and, you know, this, that, and the other. And that's not what the book is about mainly, but that's where she opened up, you know, the book about that. And I remember saying to God, oh, you think you're slick, don't you? Like, I'm just about to, like, you know, but something in reading that, she talked about how difficult it was to go to all the little birthday parties and the baby showers and the, you know, and something in that started cracking me a little bit more open. And I remember waking up from my first surgery and having the tube still down my throat, and I was freaking out, you know. And I remember when the nurse took it out, the first words out of my mouth were to God. And I was thanking him. And I remember saying to him, I guess that's not too bad for somebody who's not talking to you. Okay. You know, and even then it was still a journey of, you know, really getting to know, but this God that I had constructed in my mind, I think was sort of like a fairy. It was sort of like, oh, if I do X, Y, and Z, you're going to give me X, Y, and Z, you know? And yeah, it probably sounds a little childish or whatever, but, you know, it was like, that was part of who I had constructed. And the God that I know now is like, bad things happen, life happens, things that you don't plan happen. People hurt you, people leave you, people, you know, whatever. But I'm the thing that stays constant with you. And even when you feel betrayed by me, you don't understand me, I'm big enough to take that. Come sit down, come talk to me. Come, let's work it out together. I'm not going to leave you. I'm not going to abandon you. I'm not going to shame you. I'm not going to, you know what I mean? And it to me, I'm like, I like this God so much better. This is great, you know? And there's way more that I could tell you about, even just starting the business and how it came about in the fertility doctor's office. That's how it started, you know? But I think that my spirituality is now being rescripted because I understand life a bit better. I understand myself, a bit better. And I think that's something that's important, is to recognize the experience for what it is. It is painful, it is difficult, it is traumatic, it is, but it's also very character building. It also connects you with community. It also, has the potential, like you, to become, a platform for you. And it doesn't have to be where you're necessarily in front of people and doing speaking engagements. It could be, hey, we're meeting up at for tea, and we're just, we're just talking.
Yeah.
But it's still important.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I think that the reality of the God that I'm coming to know now is somebody who's very interested in my being rescripted and interested in how I'm rescripting him.
I think that's so beautifully put. I just love the term and the idea of being rescripted.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to know so much more. I really do. I look forward to having another conversation with you about this, because it's something I'm looking into. It's something I'm really exploring, not just for myself and within myself, but I'm opening up the conversation with other Black women now, because I think there is so much more to learn from it, and so much richness in having these conversations and understanding a bit more. So for now, I want to thank you so much for your time and joining me on this part of my journey. It's been such a pleasure having you. And as always, your beautiful smile lights up my day.
Oh, thank you. So I'm working my way up to your hairdo.
Oh, join me. This is part of my rescripting.
It's fabulous.
Thank you. So for now, I will say goodbye. Okay. And I just wish you well for your tomorrow.
Thank you. You as well.
Thank you.